the Cannabis Public Awareness Prevention. Oh, and we're being recorded. Thank you for being here for the Cannabis Public Awareness and Prevention Learning Series. This is a part two. Some of you may have been on with us when we were here about 3 weeks ago with Dr. Bonnie, and we learned about the cannabis prevention toolkit. So thank you if this is your second time on with us. I'm Sharon Robinson, and I am the Prevention Services Coordinator for the Division of Prevention. And we're glad to have you. I want to bring you greetings and certainly welcome from our Associate Commissioner, Pat Zuber Wilson, who couldn't be on today because she is vacationing. But she very much wanted to be here. This was really, we really wanted to, provide this forum to be able to give prevention specialists, school-based prevention, our colleagues in the field, just some information and learning prior to the new school year starting. We heard from so many of you of the challenges going on with cannabis use in the school, and we really just wanted to kind of push out some resources so you have some tools to go back to the new school year with. And even if you're not in a school, we really want you to have the information, the material, and the help for your constituents, your clientele. We just wanted you to have some good, sound information to go back again, to go back to school, to go back to your communities with. So we are really excited for today's presentation. And this is not the only, or the last opportunity that, we'll have in terms of giving information. We have a whole campaign kicking off in September. We're getting out some messaging to the field regarding cannabis and really factual information. We're working with the rescue agency, and I don't know if any of our partners from the rescue agency are on with us. They were invited, but they're doing a whole campaign for us for some messaging towards parents, messaging for schools. Again, because we really want to give you all the tools and equipment to at least feel confident that you can combat underage cannabis use. Um, I will also do some introductions. We have our division directors on, and I wanted to make sure I gave them the opportunity to welcome you and introduce themselves. So I don't know, Bridget, if you're on, if you want to say some couple of words or even just a hello. Okay, I'm not sure if she's on or if she's hearing us, and also to Barbara Bennett, our other division director. Again, if either of you are on and you wanted to come off mute. And if not, we will circle back to them. But I definitely want to introduce you to our team that really worked hard to bring you these presentations, and that is my team. And I will allow Stephen to introduce himself.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Stephen Hall. I am the Prevention Planning and Education Coordinator here at OASIS Division of Prevention Services. If you guys need anything tech-wise today during this, you can always reach out to me either in chat or email. Most of you have that because I sent out the Zoom links. All right.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. And Lee Bolka, you can introduce yourself and also to explain some housekeeping stuff with regards to evaluations.
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning and good afternoon to all. My name is Lee Bolka. I'm the Addictions Program Specialist and the Training Coordinator for the Division of Prevention at OASIS. So as Sharon had mentioned, some housekeeping items. We are offering 4 credit hours for this workshop series today. In order to receive credit for that, I'll be posting a survey link in the chat at the very end of the presentation. So right before 4 p.m. You'll be able to click on that and it will take you to SurveyMonkey and you fill out the evaluation of our presentation today. And then there's a second page where you can input your contact information should you want a certificate of completion for this workshop series. Just name and email, and then from there I'll be able to develop those and send those out to you individually. If you have any questions, I can also pop my email into the chat and you can reach out to me directly throughout this training or after. And thank you so much to our presenters today and for all of those who are attending with us.
Great, thank you, Lee. And so again, before I introduce our first presenter, and this is going to be kind of going to flow like a panel. We have 3 different presentations for you today, all of which we feel are very important topics and things to really learn about as we talk about cannabis and underage cannabis use. So really 3 important themes that we really want you to hear and information that we want you to have. So I will introduce our presenter in just a second, but I also wanted to say not only are we going to have some messaging coming out in the fall, but we also are going to have some focus groups related to we're coming out with a mobile app. So that's also something new on the horizon that we're going to be having some focus groups on. And also, this is not the last opportunity that we'll have to work with Dr. Bonnie. She'll be doing some in-person training and learning on the toolkit and on some of the some of the initiatives that she'll tell you about and some of the curriculums that she's introducing. And we're going to have the opportunity to have some in-person learning on that. So more to come, and please stay tuned to what we have and what we're going to be offering coming up in the fall, maybe even into the spring. But there's a lot coming out. So, and we'll try our best to record and make sure that you will all have access to the information that we are providing. But a lot of stuff coming out. And again, thank you so much for being on with us and participating with us. Before I even say 3 weeks ago, in April, myself, Lee, and Stephen had the opportunity to go to the cannabis conference that Stanford University puts out and the Reach Lab folks put out, and it was amazing. And we learned so much that we wanted to bring those leaders here to talk to you all, because they've been addressing this issue. They're 3-4 years ahead of us. We're just kind of really entertaining and really learning about underage cannabis use and legalized cannabis, and they've been doing this work. And so we brought the best presentations that we heard at that conference. They were all good presentations. I don't want to say the best. They were all great. We wish we could have, brought everyone, but we brought some of the key presentations that we wanted you all to hear and have access to. And just to tell you about our first presenter, Dr. Bonnie is the professor in the Division of Adolescent Medicine, Department of Pediatrics and Epidemiology and Public Health and Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. That's a lot. She's also the director of the Reach Labs at Stanford University. And we couldn't be more thrilled and happy to have her working with New York State. Dr. Bonnie, and I'll call her Dr. Bonnie, so glad to have you back with us. Everyone spoke so highly of the toolkit training that you did for us 3 weeks ago. And so glad to have you again. So I will turn it over to Dr. Bonnie.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon and Stephen and Oasis and everybody for being here, inviting us and inviting me back. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. So first, good morning from California. Good afternoon to you all and welcome. Today, I am going, as Sharon said, 2-3 weeks ago, whatever it was, I did the training for you on our cannabis curriculum. So I'm not going to do that again today, although I will re-mention them at the very end and give you some QR codes in case you missed it or need that again. But today I'm going to really focus on what I call the Cannabis 101. So what is cannabis and why teens are using that? And then it's going to be followed by Ben Court, who's going to dive a little deeper into kind of the middle of my talk on what's happening out there in terms of cannabis legalization, and then how do we reach young people. And then Kim Porter, and I'll introduce them more formally after my talk, but Kim Porter then will follow up with also now wrapping in parents and families and including them in the conversation. So hopefully the set of talks will give you plenty of information. And as Sharon said, I will be coming out to New York. We're figuring out when, but we'll be coming out and doing more technical assistance and talks mostly around the curriculum, but always available to answer any questions that you have. So as I often do, I like to just give a quick shout out to my amazing lab. We just, our REACH lab, by the way, REACH stands for Research and Education to Empower Adolescents and Young Adults to Choose Health. And that's very intentional, that we're not telling them no, we're telling them to choose health, healthy ways, healthy decision-making around drugs, sex, teen driving, careers, you name it, is what my lab works on. So very fortunate to be supported by a number of other researchers, a public health lawyer, public health specialist, curriculum developers, and a psychiatrist and adolescent medicine doc, and a statistician. So large group. And then, as some of you know, we also have a very large, robust, what we call our Youth Action Board, our YAB. And we have 35 adolescents and very young adults. This is just a snapshot of the folks who work with us on everything that we do in our lab, from research to education to advocacy. We also do a lot of advocacy work. And if you don't have a YAB, I definitely encourage you to work with young people in the work that you're doing, because they're the ones who tell us that's lame. No, that's not actually how we think, or that's not really what we're doing, and give us a really good perspective from the youth point, which I am far, far removed from that phase of my life. And just a quick thank you to our funders. All right, so let's get started on the content here. So when I'm going to talk about this cannabis, I'm going to do it in the form of 2 truths and a lie. Okay, maybe not 2 truths and maybe not 1 lie, but just in terms of myths and how young people think about cannabis, and parents and adults, and then to give you some truth about it. So first, and I like to as some of you know, do a little pop quiz and play along. So if you're willing, in the chat, it just makes it more fun, especially when we're virtual. Put in the chat some terms that you're hearing from youth or from teachers or yourself or parents about what other terms they're using for cannabis. If you want to pop a few of those in the chat, that'd be great. All right, I'm seeing weed. Za, I've not heard that one. All right. Yeah, Zaza. Okay, good. Dabs. Yes, good. Lots of weed. Tree. Yes, I've heard tree. Yeah, it's funny. I still am the age that calls it pot. And when I call it pot, my kids who are now adults say, Mom, it's not pot, it's weed. All right, beautiful. So lots of different terms. So this is important when we talk to young people. I'm going to use the term cannabis. I sometimes say marijuana, but I generally use cannabis because of the racial ethnic disparities and controversy that really created the name marijuana. And now, so I really want to use the more scientific term of cannabis, but I don't do that when I talk to young people. I'll use marijuana, or I'll use their terms. Some here, there are at least 1,200 terms. Here are just some of the terms that young people use. And I think when you're talking to young people, and we actually have this as an opening lesson in our curriculum, is just say, what do you call it? And I think when you do that, how do you talk about marijuana, and you ask young people that and give them the opportunity to tell you, that really opens up the door that you want to have this bi-directional conversation. And that's really important. So start with that. But these are just some of the terms that we're seeing a lot. Tree, broccoli, we've seen stick a lot. And of course, 420 would be one as well that we see a lot, at least in California. All right. So one of the myths or statements I often hear is, cannabis or vaping cannabis, everything is the same. Well, that's not true. So let's talk about it. So I'm going to go through some of the different kinds of ways to use cannabis. And a lot of these I'm sure you're very familiar with, but I'm going to give some nuanced information that I want to make sure that even if you know, you're making sure to convey this to young people. So when we're talking about smoking cannabis or inhaled cannabis, typically heated and or burned, we're talking about joints, blunts, spliffs. And then we'll talk about bongs in a minute. But joint is the cannabis flower that's in a thin paper, typically made from a cigarette. Young people are actually, they are smoking cannabis, but they're smoking it more in the form of bongs, less so in the form of joints, because if there's a good news here is that joints are more similar to a cigarette and young people don't like cigarettes as much. So we don't see a lot of joint use for teens, but there is some. Very common are blunts, and not everybody knows what a blunt is. So let me be blunt and tell you what it is. A blunt is a cannabis flower that is inserted into a cigar tobacco leaf. So either people are buying a cigar and then pulling out the tobacco and putting in the cannabis flower, more expensive way to do it, or they're just buying a cigar leaf and they're rolling that with the cannabis flower. What happens here, and then you burn it, you light it, and then inhale it that way, smoke it. What a lot of young people don't realize in a blunt is that they're actually getting tobacco, nicotine, tar, a lot of other things that are in a cigarette because they're using that cigar leaf, especially if they take a cigar and then pull out the tobacco or smoke half of it and then put in the cannabis into it. So a lot of young people don't realize that they actually can and are becoming addicted to both the nicotine as well as to the THC in the cannabis. And we see this, unfortunately, when we have young people who are arrested for cannabis use or detained for other reasons, and they cannot use cannabis in juvenile hall or wherever they might be. And not only are they struggling with the addiction around the THC, but they're also struggling with the addiction to the nicotine. And so a lot of times those teens will turn to other nicotine products like cigarettes. And so that's one of those sort of unintended consequences that we tend not to talk about. Another smoked version is a spliff that you can see at the bottom left here. That's part tobacco and part cannabis. We don't see that as often in terms of youth. So when you smoke a cannabis product like these, it takes about 5 to 10 seconds to feel the effect. The high will last anywhere from 30 minutes to several hours, depending on body size, weight, metabolism, how much THC is in the product that you've used, and so on. And of course, the THC level does depend on the cannabis flower that's used, and we'll talk about THC a little bit more. Then we do have your pipes and bongs. Pipes, if you're not familiar with this, is cannabis flower that's burned, and then the smoke is inhaled from there. A bong, similar as the flower is burned, and then the smoke is cooled through some water and then inhaled that way. And similar to other smoked versions, the same thing, 5 to 10 seconds to feel the effect, and lasts about 30 minutes to several hours, depending on what and how much you've used. And we are seeing pipes and bongs used with young people. And there are a lot of videos out there, YouTube videos that young people are seeing, telling them how to use a pipe or a bong. Dabbing. Dabbing is a form of THC use that they're all concerning, but this one is particularly concerning. Why? The THC is a concentrated wax that has really been made, farmed to be much, much more highly concentrated. So the THC level is about 80% concentration, very high. And then it's heated, and then the aerosol is what is inhaled. And it also takes about 5 to 10 seconds to feel the effect, and about 30 minutes to several hours. But we are seeing more and more young people in the emergency room, partly feeling ill, partly because of the dabbing, because of the high concentration of THC, and that they don't realize how much more concentrated, how much more THC they're using. Then we also have sprays, tinctures, capsules. We don't see these, don't seem to be used as much with youth, but these can be oil-based liquids that have cannabis, or pills. Sometimes these are CBD, which is the non-psychoactive component. Sometimes they'll have THC as well. These, because when you inhale, honestly, inhaling is the fastest way to get anything, nicotine, THC, or anything through your body, your lungs, and into your brain. So when you use something like a spray or a tincture, it could take more like 15 minutes to 2 hours to feel the effect. And then another product I want to pause on are edibles. Yeah, and I'll show more pictures around edibles in a little bit. But edibles, you know, these are your brownies, your cookies, right? But these are infused with cannabis, and they could be in the form of food or even a drink. Now, there are a couple of problems with edibles that we need to talk to young people about that they don't always realize. One is sometimes teens will go to a party and not even realize that the brownie or cookie has some cannabis in it. So that's the one thing to be aware of, and to help young people really ask the question and be able to detect whether or not food-based cannabis is being served. But the other thing that teens don't realize, one is that the length of time before you feel the effect. So it could take 15, 20 minutes to a couple of hours to feel the effect. And what happens is young people, particularly those who are used to inhaling and used to a more immediate effect, take an edible and they don't feel the high right away. So they take another, and they keep eating more until they feel that high. But it's sort of like overeating at the dinner table. You're told before you have your second portion, maybe wait 20 minutes to see if you're still hungry. It's the same thing here. If a young person doesn't wait and they just keep taking and using more and more, by the time they feel the effect, they've really had too much and they're really feeling pretty sick. So we're seeing a lot of overconsumption and young people winding up in the emergency room, not dying from this, but definitely feeling pretty sick and winding up in the emergency room. And particularly bad, of course, if they're driving or engaging in other behaviors along the way. So that's one problem. The other problem is that the amount of THC that's in there can really vary by which portion or bite you have. So I think of this as sort of the think about a chocolate chip cookie, for example. If you're a baker, I love to bake cookies, you put in chocolate chips, you mix it, and you know that, especially if you're doing them at home, different if they're manufactured, then they're more regulated in terms of the amount of chocolate chips per cookie. But if you're doing it at home, one may have 3 chocolate chips, one cookie may have 15. You don't know. And so, because rarely do we count. Well, that's the similar idea here, where if you're making an edible, particularly at home, and you're mixing in the cannabis into the brownie, for example, or cookies or drink, you don't really know in any given portion, any given amount, how much THC is in there. And that's been the big problem as well. And even now with legalization and more regulation going on, still not very tightly regulated. And so you still could have different proportions of cannabis in any given bite. And young people don't know what a dose is. They don't necessarily read. Adults don't either, by the way. This is something I've been hearing a lot about in the emergency room, and colleagues I know who have had friends who've thought that they just had one dose, and they actually ate multiple chips or multiple bites of the cookie and wound up being pretty sick. So something to talk to young people. And in our newest curriculum, our Safety First, we do talk about dose and dosing and frequency to help people understand this. All right, and then finally, aerosolizing or vaping THC. Now, we know that there's been a dramatic increase in e-cigarette use, nicotine, THC, and so on. But vaped cannabis is not new. We've been seeing this in a volcano or some other form of an aerosolizer, but it's increasing. Right now, the most common form of cannabis use for young people still is the smoked versions, but vaping is really increasing pretty rapidly. And it's pretty similar to the rate of getting through the body and into the brain, lasts about 30 minutes and so on. But a lot of young people think, oh, I'm not smoking, I'm just vaping or inhaling, it's probably fine. You're still getting the THC, and you're still getting the vitamin E acetate or propylene glycol or whatever else is in the other chemicals in that aerosol that's going through your body and hurting your lungs. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. So when we talk about vaping, I like to show this video, and I can't remember if I showed it to you before, but I show this because, and I'll show you in a second, it's very hard sometimes to tell the difference between a nicotine and a cannabis e-cigarette. And this is important, particularly for school people, parents, police officers. If you're trying to figure out what a student is using, sometimes it is hard. So let me just quickly show this. There's no sound. I showed it a couple times. And on the far right are your cigars. This was a video taken for me from a school of products that they confiscated. Let me show you again. And basically on the left, you're going to see the products that are more your nicotine vapes. The middle are more your THC vapes, but it's not very easy to tell the difference. Generally, if it's a THC vape, it is more likely to be metal and glass, whereas the nicotine are more plastic with some metal and glass within it, but a little bit different. But it's really hard to tell the difference. The other thing is that a lot of young people are buying a nicotine vape and then either inhaling it all or half of it and then adding in the THC to it. And one young person said, yeah, I get a cherry nicotine e-cigarette, use about half, then put in the marijuana, and now I have a cherry flavored marijuana. And so it's something that's becoming pretty common. I'm just checking the chat to make sure nothing from me. Oh, yes, thank you. Good comment. Somebody commenting about the overdose comment that I made. You can definitely overdose. I meant die. We don't have a lot of cases of young people who are, or anybody who are overdosing and dying from cannabis. It has happened. I'm not saying it does not happen, but it's more that people who are dying from cannabis tend to be dying from driving or other activities at the same time of using, or mixing cannabis with other drugs. But you definitely, oh, sorry, I'm trying to, oh, okay. Just looking at the chat and seeing comments, I'll mention that. So yeah, I didn't mean to imply that young people are not overdosing. It's just different. They're definitely getting sick, and we'll talk about some of those issues. They're definitely becoming addicted. I'm not trying to underplay the harms of it. It's just the death itself is not there, thankfully, as what we're seeing with some of the other drugs. Some people are commenting, just to keep up with this, about the odor. It is absolutely true that the problem with the vaped cannabis is that they smell good. They don't smell like skunk or THC typically smells, and especially the ones that have and some do smell like weed, absolutely, but many of them smell like flavors, and that's been the problem, and that's part of why it's so difficult to really detect what it is that a young person is using. I often tell parents, if your kid's room is smelling like blueberries, strawberries, and bananas, it may not be fruit salad, and that they might be vaping something. And so definitely to be vigilant about that. Thank you. All great questions and all great comments. And please keep me true, keep me honest. And this is important. All right. So another thing that we hear from young people is that they'll say, I'm not being influenced by others. I can make all my own decisions. I'm totally in control. And a lot of young people don't understand the marketing and the peer pressure as well. But I'm going to talk about marketing for a minute of cannabis, and that the marketing of cannabis is particularly to young people, BIOC, which is youth of color, and LGBTQ youth. And I'll show you some examples. And I think Ben's can even highlight some more of this marketing, but I just want to show you a few. These are right here, what you're seeing, like if you look at the lower one, Sour Patch is Stony Patch. There are many examples of, and I'll show you a few more, of cannabis products, particularly edibles and drinkables, that are very appealing to young people. And I don't know about New York laws, and maybe one of you can tell me, but I know in California right now, there is a law circulating, I'm not sure where it stands right now, but to eliminate flavored cannabis, just like we're trying to in California did, and I think New York did as well, to eliminate flavored tobacco, or at least e-cigarettes. So it's been something that's been of concern that we need to be very vigilant about and really talk to parents, because if you're a parent and you walk by some of these products, you're going to think that it's candy. And in fact, we have snacks in my lab, and somebody bought Sour Patch, and I kind of did a double take and went, wait a second, is this actually Sour Patch, or are we looking at drugs here? And thankfully it was not drugs. The regulated comment, yeah, but how regulated is it really being? I don't know about New York and California. It's supposed to be. There's just really bad regulation going on right now. So it's in the books, but it's not being enforced, and that's been the problem. So just a few other examples of some flavors that we've seen throughout images of how young people or anybody are being influenced. And what I hear a lot, I am a big sports fan, and I sorry guys, I'm a Warriors fan, and I hear a lot when I listen to the sports radio of somebody saying, I'm going to take a gummy, and you know what they mean is a THC cannabis gummy. And it's just very, very concerning how sort of nonchalant everybody's become around these flavored tobacco products. And just some other ones here that you can see. These are more recent ads that have come out, and images around infused gummies and infused ice cream and other products. The other thing is we know that young people and anybody of who are LGBTQ identifying are also targeted. These came out around Pride days, where you can see very much the rainbows, the colors, and the language for queer young people. And the reason why I'm particularly concerned is we know that LGBTQ plus youth and young adults are significantly more likely to use any substances, and partly to use the substances because they're stressed, because they're dealing with a lot of, everybody's stressed now, but dealing with a lot of stress right now, a lot of stress and coping, particularly with a lot of secular and political issues going on that are around young people. And so, these sort of normalize cannabis use as being okay and being helpful to the LGBTQ community, and just something that we have to be aware of. And we see this with nicotine too, a lot of targeting of LGBTQ youth. And then we also see a lot of targeting to young people and adults of color. And we actually have a study going just on this itself, on the targeting of people of color and youth of color for drug use, cannabis, alcohol, huge alcohol targeting going on, and then some around nicotine as well, that there's just a lot. And not only that, but this is a joint attached to a Game Boy or a game cart, whatever you call those. That's what that is. And so, not only are you targeting people of color, but also young people and gamers, which is another issue. So the other statement I hear a lot from young people is, hey, cannabis has been around forever. It's not addictive. And that is not true. And we'll talk a little bit more about addiction and brain development in a minute. But just if you look at just the THC levels, it is not your grandma's or your parents' THC anymore. And some statistics are showing, unfortunately, I don't have a updated slide that goes beyond 2013 here. But if you look at just the amounts of THC now versus when I was a kid, one joint today is equivalent to about 10 joints when I was a kid. So the THC levels, the concentration that's in there, not just in dabs, but in any joint or any THC is much, much higher than it used to be. And young people and adults just don't realize that, how much stronger it's gotten. And then let's talk about harm. I hear a lot of, oh, cannabis, especially if it's in the vape form, it's not hard, it's nothing to worry about. And it's much, much less harmful than smoking. And that is not the case. So let's spend some time talking about the health effects of cannabis and why we're concerned. So cannabis, particularly in a young person, and look, if you're 21 or over, well, brains continue to develop to about 25. So I would say 25 or over, even though our legal age is 21. But if you're 25 or over, I'm not going to regulate or decide what you do. You're an adult. But we're worried about the kids, and that's what we're talking about here. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is, in addition to our bodies changing, until our mid-20s and growing, and our brains changing, our lungs are also developing until our early 20s. And a lot of people don't realize that. So I often tell young people, it is the best time right now to protect your brains and your lungs and let them develop as they're supposed to develop. And we know, and I'll go into a few of these a little more detail, but we know that cannabis does actually change your brain. It alters your brain development, increases anxiety, paranoia. There's more and more studies now coming out that cannabis not only is associated with psychosis, and particularly schizophrenia, but it actually causes schizophrenia. We had a keynote speaker 2 years ago in our cannabis conference, Dr. Robin Murray from the UK, a psychiatrist who really believes that cannabis causes psychosis. Not in everybody, of course not. It's people who have some predetermined or are some reason why they may have become schizophrenic to begin with, but that cannabis is that trigger. We also know about lung damage. We know that your heart rate increases. We know that you have more poor muscle coordination and balance falling, and then increased appetite and vomiting. So let me talk about a few of these a little more in detail. So I always like to pause and talk about the brain development for a few minutes, because not everybody understands brain development, how it works, and why it's so important to look at brain development and to talk to young people. And I'll say right now, for those of you who have seen our curriculums, we have an entire lesson just on brain development and why the brain development is so important and why it's implicated in the addiction. And what we talk to teens, and this is really important, we don't want to tell teens your brain's developing and therefore you're stupid and incompetent. You certainly don't want to do that. When my now 27-year-old was 14 in health education, Brianne came home, and Brianne is objectively, not just because I'm her mom, but objectively off the chart gifted. Came home at age 14 crying like crazy. And I said, what is going on? And very serious, conscientious, anxious kid. I am stupid. Why are you stupid? Well, we learned in health education that our brains are not developed, and they're not going to be developed till I'm in my mid-20s, and I am stupid. And, and of course we had the conversation, and then she got mad at me because you know everything, Mom, all the people out there, you're a developmental psychologist, and crying, and then said, okay, tell me more, Mom. And I said, the whole point of your brain development is what makes you cool. It's why you can do the things you do. It's why you're so creative, why you're a better writer, why you can learn language better than I can as a full-on adult. It doesn't mean that you're stupid. And your brain still functions. It's still, the structure is the same. It's developing, it's changing. And went on to explain how it works. And she said, oh, okay, now I understand it a lot better. So since then, I've been teaching brain development. It is in our curriculum. And what we talk about is your brain during adolescence is trying to figure out who you are, what you want to be in life. We often say, as a developmental psychologist, adolescents are figuring out who they are, what they want to be, where they're going in life, and whether they're doing it well, right? And if you're a parent of an adolescent, I used to joke, my kids would ask that, and I'd literally check the box for my slides when I, not physically, but like in my mind, going, yep, they're asking all those things. That's the job of an adolescent and a young adult. So it is the time that we want to let that process happen naturally and not allow drugs to interfere with that process. So let me explain that a little bit more in some slides, and I'll keep having that conversation just so you understand it. And so when you talk to young people, you're not telling them that you're stupid, not that you're doing that, but that you're giving that more positive outlook on adolescence, that it's a great time, but it's the time when we do not want to interfere with that natural process by giving drugs. So with the adolescent brain, it develops from the back to the front. And the part of the brain that develops first, the physical coordination, the amygdala, the part that's responsible for emotion in the back of the brain, develops first. The part of the brain that develops last and is not fully developed until you're around age 25, based on fMRI scanning and brain scanning and so on, is the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobe, the front part of the brain. If you remember, you have 4 lobes of a brain. The prefrontal cortex is what's responsible for decision-making, thinking about the future, executive decisions, and that does not develop until much later. Sorry, just looking at the chat. All right. I'll talk about fentanyl in a few minutes. So the way I like to think about this, and I developed this analogy years ago when I was actually in Los Angeles, where I grew up, and was giving a talk to teachers and trying to explain the brain development. I went, the LA freeway system. You cannot get a better analogy than that. So this is how I think about it and talk to young people. And these version of these slides are in our curriculum. When you're an adolescent and young adult, you have lots of connections, your neurons connecting, right, within your brain. That's how we communicate within ourselves. It's how your brain communicates to itself and to the rest of the body. What happens is during young adolescence, we overproduce these connections, and many of which we're born with too. We overproduce and we're born with them. And so it's not that we can't get from A to B. We can. Adolescents can definitely make the decisions, but they're kind of clouded. There's lots of stuff going on at once, lots of thinking going on, lots of processing. So it's a little bit more crowded for them. There's a little more traffic, right? Going from point A to point B, but they can still do it. I do not want to give the impression that they're totally incompetent. They're not. It's that the process or what goes into that decision may be a little bit different from what we think about as an adult. They're also adding in different things, like you say to a teen, would you have sex without a condom? Yeah, I want to please my boyfriend. Whereas we'd say as an adult, what about STIs or pregnancy? That may or may not enter into the equation to a young person, or it may enter into the equation, but they're more thinking about the social benefits than the health risks. The balance in the equation is different for an adolescent than for an adult. All right, so what happens is then as young adults into adulthood, we then prune away, get rid of the connections that we don't need anymore. And then we smooth them over. You may have heard of sheathing or myelinating. So we prune away and then we myelinate the parts of the brain that we are keeping. And so now we have less traffic and much smoother connections between A to B. So what happens in this process, and I'm going to show you a video to clarify this a little bit more too. What happens in this process is we are born with the ability to become addicted. We're born with the receptors in our brain. If we don't use them, if we don't reinforce them, then they go away. But if we reinforce them, then we sort of get, as Victor Denoble talks about, like our receptors come up and then we get earmuffs on them, he talks about. But in the idea that we're reinforcing and popping up these connections more and more and reinforcing them by using that drug. And then as a result, our body wants more and more of that drug. If we wait until 25-ish, when our brains are fully developed, it is much harder to become addicted. I'm not giving the message that at age 25, we tell people it's okay to use. That is not the message. My kids got that message in high school, like, just turn 25 and you could start using drugs. I'm like, no, that's not the message. But there is the message of harm reduction, and I'll talk about that a little bit more of. And it's best to delay as long as you can if you are going to use at all, because we want to prevent addiction, and that's really important. So I'm going to play this video. This is not our video. We're actually redoing this because I want to give the message not of age 21. I don't want young people to think just because the law says 21, the day I turned 21, I'm totally safe to go use drugs. As I said, brain continues till 25. And even after that, we still worry about, even if we're less worried about addiction, the effect of the drug is still there on your body. But I think that this so we're redoing this video in my lab, but I think it gives an idea of what I'm talking about. So let me play this for you.
It's important to understand that everyone in the world has addictions, or rather natural addictions, to things that are good, like food, water, and sleep. These natural addictions are important for our health and survival, and without them, we would not hunger or crave the things we need to survive. Now, we aren't exactly born with these natural addictions. Our body creates them. Let's look at an example. When you bite into an apple, your brain says, "Yum." Your brain recognizes that this apple is good for you. It has nutrition, vitamins, and gives your body the energy it needs to survive. Whenever the brain recognizes something that's good, it releases a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine causes you to experience pleasure. It's what makes you feel good, like when biting into an apple. The brain releases this dopamine in order to teach the body that this is healthy and good for your survival, and that it should remember to do it again. Now, there are other things we do that can release the pleasurable dopamine, like playing video games, exercising, or reading a good book. However, the amount of dopamine released during these activities is less than what's released when we eat food. The brain does this so it can recognize which is more important. So if you go 2 days without reading a book, or 2 days without eating food, your body is going to crave the food over the book. As such, your brain creates what's called a hierarchy of survival, which ranks how important each of these things is to your survival. Now, there are some things that will not cause the release of dopamine, like eating soap or punching yourself in the face. The brain knows that these things are not good and therefore does not release the pleasurable dopamine because your brain does not want you to do it again. Now, let's look at alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, and other drugs. These are all classified carcinogens, proven to cause cancer and other fatal diseases. Now, your brain should recognize that these things are harmful to your body. However, these substances have special chemical characteristics that fool the brain into releasing dopamine, oftentimes in much greater amounts than the body has ever experienced before. Because of this, the body is fooled into thinking that these things are good and important, sometimes even more important than food, water, or sleep, and consequently hijacks the #1 spot in your survival hierarchy. So now, if you go 2 days without eating or 2 days without drinking alcohol, your body will actually crave the alcohol over the food. This is an extreme case of addiction, where the person addicted believes that they will die if they don't get it. The severity of the addiction depends on where the alcohol or drug lies within your hierarchy of survival, and can increase even with casual use. Research shows that people under the age of 21 are at the highest risk of having their survival hierarchy hijacked. Why? Because their brains are still growing and developing and are hypersensitive to false shocks of dopamine caused by these harmful substances. By 21, the brain is more fully developed and mature, and the survival hierarchy becomes more permanent and less susceptible to getting hijacked. The flip side is that once you are 21, it becomes very difficult to remove these harmful substances from your survival hierarchy. Studies show that 9 out of 10 people who currently struggle with addiction started drinking, smoking, or using before the age of 21. Understanding addiction.
All right, so hopefully that was just they're just giving their reference. I can't pop the link into the chat while I'm talking because I can't chew and dance at the same time. But I will do that when I'm done giving my talk. But it is embedded into the slides as well that Sharon has and will share with you. But I think it's a great video. I think it's really helpful. It is showable to teens. They like it. Like I said, we want to update it in my lab and not give the age band of 21. That worries me. That is the legal band, but anybody want to pop in the chat or have a sense of why you think the law went to age 21 for tobacco, cannabis, alcohol, and not 25, which is when the brain is fully developed? Or if you want to come off mute for a second, I know there are 200 of you, but just curious if anybody wants to give a go at that. It's always fun. Oops. Money, yes. Agreed. I love it. You guys are great. You make money. What about front lobbying? And there's a less, you guys are perfectly correct. I will give you the less negative perspective, for lack of a better word. Part of it was to match the alcohol age. You're absolutely correct. So I was part of actually the committee, the Institute of Medicine committee that created the report that partly led to Tobacco 21, and cannabis is following suit with that. And we all said, and we wrote about, that the brain continues to develop till age 25. The problem is that if you make a law that's to age 25, that's really hard. It's literally the sniff chest. We would have been laughed at. There's only one company or one industry that got it right with age 25. What's that? See if anybody. Sure, you're all going to get it. Yeah, car rentals. Absolutely. Thank you. Car rentals. Absolutely. And so I do think it should be 25, but putting a law in the books, I mean, same thing with driving, right? A lot of us would prefer our kids don't drive until much later, but imagine also being a parent of a 22-year-old and having to drive them everywhere still, although I still do, even at my kids' ages. But yeah, it's never going to get to exactly. We're not going to get by into age 25. So the law is 21, but I still don't want to give the message of 21. I want to give the message that your brain continues to develop until your mid-20s, but also that we just want to help and encourage young people to make decisions that are healthy for them. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. Let me get back to the slides. Let's talk a little bit more about the brain that goes along. And by the way, also, some of you were asking about the slides. Some of the slides that I'm using are also in the curriculum, in cooler form in the curriculum. As you know, we use Canva, but either the same slides or the concept of all the slides are certainly in our curriculum as well. All right, so brain. Certainly addiction, we are aware of that. We also know that cannabis can impair your learning, memory, attention, impulse control, and decision-making. It actually lowers your academic performance, and there's some evidence that it lowers the IQ points if you're using repeatedly. I am not talking about one-time use. I do not believe in overscaring. I do not believe in being hyperbolic. We are not talking about using once in a while or using once. We're talking about repeated use for a lot of these. It's also important to know repeated use, by the way, and addiction does not have to be daily. You can actually be addicted and have the brain cues. We see this with nicotine. If you use, say, every Saturday or every other day, your brain actually gets used to that, right? Your brain will say, oh, every Saturday at 10, I have a few joints. Your brain actually gets used to that. So I don't want you also to think that the definition of addiction is that you have to be using it absolutely every day. That is certainly not the case. All right. The other thing that we see with cannabis is sleep issues. Some people think that cannabis helps you sleep. It actually causes more problems with sleep. And of course, the more you're using and the more frequent you're using and the higher THC, the more you're going to have these impairments that I just mentioned. And then the brains do not recover. So the brain, anything that you're inflicting on your brain as an adolescent will continue. All right. Moving to other body parts, let's talk about the lungs. So we know vaping or smoking anything, by the way, not just, originally people were thinking nicotine. This is true for cannabis as well. We know that any smoking or vaping of any sort inflames and irritates the airways. We know this in California with the smoke and the fires, and you all sadly had the smoke that we get from the Canada fires. You know that it could irritate your lungs. We also know that any of the smoke or vaping can destroy the air sacs of the lungs. And we also know that you can have a weaker immune response to infection. And in fact, there's a hospital or a set of hospitals actually in New York City. I've worked with some who will not perform elective surgery on an adolescent who is vaping because they are concerned about the infection rates and healing, less likely to heal. So we also know, and this slide admittedly is more for nicotine, but I still want to bring it up because it's still relevant to vaping cannabis. There are lots of studies that show that there are respiratory effects of vaping anything. And this is largely due to the propylene glycol and the glycerin and the vitamin E acetate that are in the vaping products that allow the drug to be able to move through into your bloodstream, your lungs, and into your brain. And we also know that the flavors themselves in a vaping product are harmful. So for example, diacetyl, which is a buttery flavor that's used a lot. We see that in microwave popcorn, that can be harmful. Cinnamonaldehyde, vanilla. These are also a T-bone steak, believe it or not, that flavor for some reason is particularly harmful to our lungs. There's something that the federal government coins as GRAS generally, and it's not meant to be a pun on weed, but generally recognized as safe. This is for oral consumption, but not inhaled. So that is the other thing, is that you can take butter and heat it and eat it quite happily, but you heat it to several hundred degrees, which is what's happening with an e-cigarette, and then you inhale the result from it, the resulting aerosol, that could be harmful to your lungs. And so when you have young people say, it's just THC, or it's just harmful, or it's just harmless water and flavors, it's not. Even by themselves, just the aerosol can be harmful, and that's important to tell young people. The aerosol in terms of the ingredients that are in there. We also know that particularly smoking cannabis can lead to a cough, phlegm, lung illness, and infection, can impair the immune cells. We don't know a lot about lung cancer, but we do know that there is more tar actually in cannabis than what we even see in a cigarette. So there's a lot of tar in there. And we need more studies. We know that when we inhale cannabis, we have a biomass combustion that has about 1,000 chemicals, including very fine particles. And by the way, vaping anything also has particularly fine particles that get lodged deep into the lungs. Then we also know, as I said, the respiratory system. And then, as I mentioned, blunts, which has the nicotine as well, you're getting that double whammy. So you may have heard of EVALI, e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury. This was something that we were seeing back before COVID. You can see here, healthy versus vaped lungs. As of February of 2020, there were almost 3,000 cases in the US, not all youth, still adults as well. There were almost 70 deaths. And what seemed to be was a lot of it was from vaping THC. Not all. We do see some young people who seem to be having EVALI from only nicotine vaping as well, but certainly THC seems to be responsible, and it seems to be the vitamin E acetate. Unfortunately, the CDC stopped collecting data in February of 2020. We did have a global pandemic. I understand why, but I really wish that we were still having more CDC data collection on this issue as well, because I've talked to a lot of emergency room doctors, pulmonary doctors, including a very close colleague in New York who's still seeing EVALI. So it's something to keep an eye out. If you know kids who are coming to you who you suspect are using drugs or vaping anything, by the way, and they're complaining shortness of breath, headaches, that's not a time to sit down and say, let's quit, let's talk about stuff. That's a time to get into the emergency room, because EVALI is something that is very serious. Just check the chat. All right. And then the other thing is smoking, vaping, and COVID. So there have been some studies that really are showing, not surprisingly, a link between smoking, vaping, anything, and COVID. And we know that when you smoke, as I mentioned before, that the breathing in, or the aerosol. Sorry, so I think somebody needs to mute. That breathing in actually harms the lungs. We know that the novel coronavirus also attacks the lungs. And if you have weakened lungs, you're, of course, going to be at greater risk for attack and more severe lung infection. And we also know for young people, it's not just the lung part, it's that they're sharing. Young people share their drugs a lot. And so, and in fact, we did some interviews with young people up in California, and they said, oh, we're standing 6 feet apart, and then we're sharing it. And you're going, oh God, let's talk about public health. So it's a problem. So we're also seeing something called cannabis hyperemesis symptoms. This is with using a fair amount of cannabis, that young people are presenting to the emergency room with vomiting and abdominal pain, often caused by long-term use. My adolescent medicine doctor friends here next door are saying that they see this a lot, and that the symptoms do ease after a couple of days when a young person stops using marijuana or uses less of it. Mental health, I mentioned this, but just to really bring this home, that cannabis can cause hallucinations and paranoia, depression and anxiety. And a lot of young people will use drugs to self-medicate. They use drugs because they think that it'll help them feel better, when in reality, it does not. It helps them, it actually makes them feel worse. And they think it makes them feel better because just when they're feeling worse or they're having some withdrawal, they take another hit and they feel better. But it's not that it's making them feel good. It's kind of a false shock, as the video said, a false shock of feeling good. And that's part of the problem there. And then we also know about the increased risk of psychosis. Yes, PowerPoint will be shared. We also know that cannabis use is associated with suicidality, significant increases in suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts when one is using. Yes, and everything I'm saying here is for adults as well. I completely agree. And that is why I don't like having the Brain 21 conversation. I like it to go later. Completely agree. It's just I'm a youth person, so I'm talking about youth. Other health effects, if I haven't convinced you enough, memory loss, heart rate, paranoia, red eyes, dry mouth, hunger, we know that, and so on. All right. Another myth is that smoking or vaping doesn't harm anyone. I could do whatever I want, especially in my house, in my apartment, next to other, it does not harm anybody. And that is certainly not true, as I'm sure you know. So the secondhand smoke or secondhand plume or aerosol that comes from vaping or smoking, but particularly smoking in this slide, smoking cannabis does have effects just in that smoke itself. The smoke contains cadmium, chromium, benzene. It's actually on the California Prop 65 list of toxins. There are 33 at least toxins that are in that smoke. It causes harm to the cardiovascular system for other people. And young kids who've been exposed to THC actually have detectable levels of THC in their own body. And that can cause issues with ear infection, eyes, asthma, and eczema. And if there was a study done in 2018 of parents in Colorado, which I think was either the first or second state to go legal for recreational marijuana, and it showed that kids in the home of parents who were using definitely had trace levels of THC. And then yes, it can affect the fetus if you're pregnant. The other thing that a lot of people may not know about is what we call third-hand smoke. So you smoke and the smoke goes into the air and it mixes with the other chemicals in the air and falls to the ground, and it can actually have some toxins. We see this more with nicotine, but it's also, some studies are suggesting it with THC as well, or any smoked form of cannabis, that you're going to have levels of the toxins on the couch, on the floor, and so on. So we worry about pets and we worry about babies. And this is great if you talk to a young person. A lot of young people don't care about themselves, unfortunately, or their health, or they're not thinking about their health, but they're certainly thinking about the positives. When we talk to teens, we don't want to only talk about the negatives. We do want to talk about the positives, but we also want to talk about social issues, because that's what young people really care about. But they also really care about, they may say they don't care about their sibling, but they do, and they do care about their pets. So talking about those effects tends to get young people to listen. The other thing that's important to know about secondhand and thirdhand smoke effects is multi-unit housing. And this is a huge advocacy piece that those of you who are interested in advocacy and policy, really I'm talking about smoke-free air laws, not only for cigarettes and vaping, but cannabis as well, because we know that the secondhand smoke does go from apartment to apartment in multi-unit housing. And it can do this through the walls, through the vents, through the windows, pipes, etc. And we are seeing this for third hand as well. You're going to track it through the apartment and through the hallways and so on. And this is important because people who are people of color, low income, young adults are disproportionately more likely to live in crowded multi-unit housing. So they're more likely to be exposed to secondhand effects. And so this is something important. It's important to tell people, look, smoke is smoke. It doesn't matter what that smoke is. Again, it could just be from fires, but it can be harmful to our lungs, and we need to be aware of that. All right, a few more. Cannabis are hard to get, easy to hide, and well regulated. If anybody wants to take a second to pop in the chat, how many e-cigarettes do you see here? What about vapes in terms of what I was just saying? Yes, all the same. It said that it was whether it's smoke or vapes that we're seeing second and third hand effects. So it doesn't really matter. It's that aerosol is going through. All right, great. Love that some people are playing along. We've got 6 to 9. Awesome. You guys are great. I love it. All right. Ta-da. There you go. I think it's 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. So these are, can be nicotine or cannabis, but I show this to show how easy it is for young people to hide these products. You've got a Flume. You've got another vape here. We don't have the THC, but it's the same idea that it's really easy to hide. They look like pens. They look like USBs. So not only is it hard to tell what is in that vaping product, whether it's nicotine, non-nicotine, cannabis, oils, whatever it is, but also it's hard to see. And this is important when we talk to parents in particular and teachers that they can see this and pay attention to know where it is where it is. And I've had parents say, I didn't even know my kid was vaping until I did laundry and the little caps fell out. So something when you're talking to families to help them be aware of. I kind of gave this away. Oh shoot, this should say New York. Sorry, not California. Sorry. What's the legal age to purchase tobacco and cannabis? Tell me.
21.
Thank you.
No
All
problem.
right. You guys get the gold star, the platinum star. Most people I talk to are still saying 18. It is 21. And this is super important. And I'm going to talk tobacco as well as cannabis for just a second. A lot of parents and educators and healthcare providers think it is still 18. In tobacco, it became the law of the land in December of 2019, signed into law that you have to be 21 across the country, be 21 to be allowed to use to purchase. And that is true for any states that have legalized cannabis as 21 as well. Please help. Please keep this going and keep vigilant about this. We still have stores who are selling to people who are 18 or younger. So when you see things like this that say local discounts and student discounts, this is a picture taken in California. Sorry, I don't have New York pictures. Maybe when I come to New York, I'll take some pictures. I'm actually going to be in New York in a couple of weeks, but for a weekend, but that's just purely for fun. I'm going to take my husband who just turned 60 to New York. We're going to go see a couple Broadway plays and have a crazy time there. But if I see pictures, I'll take them. So I'm more prepared for the next talk. But student discounts. The majority of students are under 21, right? You end college at about 22, unless you're like me and you keep going forever and ever and ever and never leave school. But most people are done by around 21, 22, 23. So when you talk about a student discount, you were talking about underage people. And this is a huge issue that we're seeing more and more. All right, so in summary, and then I'll wind up with a few resources for you. And what you could do, and then hand it off to the next speaker. Oh, and time for questions. But we've got stealth youth-focused products. These are cool, they're fun, and they are marketed to young people. They have very high levels of THC. They have flavors. They have flavors mask the harsh taste, mask the THC, mask the smell, the packaging and the ads. And they are harmful, and not just to youth, but to adults as well. Absolutely. So in a way, again, I talked about this 3 weeks ago, so I'm not going to go into a lot, but I will say that if you are talking to young people, and Ben and Kim are going to go into this a lot more, so I'm only highlighting a few areas, but talk about the dangers of cannabis. Young people don't know, but I would also balance that. And I'm going to talk about harm reduction in a minute, but I also balance it with perceived and possible real benefits that young people or anybody might have. And when we overblow the risks, even though I spent a lot of time talking about the risks are real. But when you're also talking to teens, you cannot make it sound like, the minute you take this drug, you're going to get sick, or the minute you use, you're going to become addicted, or your brain's going to blow up. Because the problem is, first of all, the majority of teens you're talking to, not the majority, well, maybe the majority, 50, 60%, 30% have already used. And most of those young people who have used liked it. They enjoyed it, and nothing bad happened to them. So if you're going to just say it's all bad, a teen who's enjoyed it is going to say, well, wait, I liked it. So the tone is, one, yes, talk about the health effects, and we do that, but it's to give a balanced perspective as well. And it's also to help them understand that they may not have had negative effects now. That's great that they didn't, but we're worried about tomorrow, next year, next month, next year. That we're worried about that. We're worried about their friends. They're worried about their brain development. Talk about the social effects. Those are also important to talk about with young people. But you don't want to make it sound in your classrooms like nobody's using and it's only bad, because you're going to basically get young people to shut down and not listen to you. You will lose credibility. So that's important. It's important to help young people talk to a healthcare provider or a counselor to be able to get help if they are supposed to say cannabis, but if they're using. And then often your county departments of public health will have some resources for you. Start the conversation. Oh, hello, going the wrong way. Why are you not going the way I want you to? There you go. When we talk to young people, it's not a lecture, it's a conversation. And I'm sure Ben and Kim will support that and how they talk about this, but it's a conversation, not a lecture. And it's important. That's why I say start off by asking them, what do you call these things? What do you call cannabis? What do you call marijuana? What do you know about it? Get them to start the conversation with you. It's important not to say, we need to talk, or you don't use, right? Because what are they going to say? No, actually, Mom, you're wrong. I do use. That then is very off-putting to them. So talk about it more globally, then start talking about the risks, talk about the potential benefits, but say why you're still concerned about it for them, that there are some concerns, there are a lot of concerns, and you may not find out whether they're using right away. It may take some conversation. It may take a few times, a few days. I often say, go and say, hey, I just went to this seminar today and heard a few talks. Would love to talk about what I learned, and that's the way to have the conversation. Find the right time. This is not a scheduled conversation either. I used to have a friend who was also a developmental psychologist, but she'd say, like, on June 6th, I'm going to sit down and talk to my kid about sex. And I'm like, you don't schedule it. Let it come out organically from some other thing that you've seen in the environment. That works a lot better with young people. And, keep an eye on young people. Are you suddenly seeing a change in clothing, or are they more depressed or withdrawn than you've seen before? Are they more moody or irritable? Teens are moody. Teens are irritable. I mean, a sudden change and a sudden dramatic increase. Maybe they don't want to talk to you anymore. That's a sign of depression, sign of anxiety, and a sign of potential drug use. Same thing with school performance or truancy. And then again, if you're seeing coughing or trouble breathing or headaches, that's not the time to sit down and say, let's just have a conversation. That's the time to get them some help right away, because we are concerned about lung issues and brain development and other health effects. That we have our cannabis awareness and prevention toolkit that has our Smart Talk healthy cannabis curriculum in there. A lot of what I've just talked about in a more youth-friendly way is in there. I do want to mention, I'll talk about Smart Talk again in a second. I do want to mention Healthy Futures. This is our alternative to suspension curriculum. In about 2 weeks, or maybe even about 2 weeks, we will have a Healthy Futures cannabis version, as well as a very cool revised tobacco version. So these are for young people who have been caught using and you're trying to help them move towards quit. It even includes making your motivation and a quit plan. Our Smart Talk, I need to update this slide. Our Smart Talk, I think since I even presented to you guys, the elementary school version's available. So we now have elementary, middle, and a high school program for our cannabis prevention curriculum. The elementary school is just 2 lessons and they're super cool and fun. The middle and high school are 5 lessons. And they focus on brain, but in that more positive spirit. They talk about your body, talk about keeping people and communities healthy, talk about targeted marketing and refusal skills, and then has a whole session just on wellness. So harm reduction, just a little bit briefly, and I think Ben may talk more about this. I'm not sure if you will or not, but we talk about harm reduction as absolutely discouraging young people from starting at all. I do not want I do not want you to think that a harm reduction approach tells kids to go ahead and use. Absolutely not. Our harm reduction curriculum, our safety first, the first thing we say is the best way to discourage use or the best way to reduce your harm is not to use at all. We say that on almost every slide. But again, we've got young people who are already using. We have young people who have friends who are using. We have young people whose parents are using. So how do we offer them a more balanced perspective and help them stay safe if they are encountering or using drugs themselves or other friends are? So our safety first really talks about abstinence as most important, empowers teens to make healthy decisions, and certainly does not encourage, but also does not judge if they are using. So I'll leave this for just a second. Our QR code, if you want to, you take your phone, hopefully it works. Let me do it as well, just in case it's not working. Oh, is it working? Should be working. There we go. Yes, that gets you to our one-stop shop for all of our curriculums, but I'll pop in the chat also where you can find our curriculums more directly. Follow us on social media. And in fact, we're sending out a newsletter in the next day or two. Shoot me an email with your email if I have your permission to put you on the list. Oasis, you're already on the list. You don't have a choice. But that way you'll get our newsletter and it'll give more updates on our new curriculums. Everything we're doing right now is, well, not Smart Talk and not You and Me Together Vape Free. Those are pretty much set, with the exception of reducing the length, which some of you have told me about. So let's talk about that. But Safety First is relaunching in a couple weeks. What's on there now is not going to be the final. In 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks, we'll have a very cool new version. We're really excited about. Healthy Futures is coming out. We have Spanish versions coming out, new fact sheets for you, all kinds of information. So follow us on social media. We push out information regularly, and then we do quarterly newsletters. And there's my email. Thank you so much. I'll pop in, there's my email. By the way, this email that I'm putting in is the same. You don't have to use both. They go to the same place. So any questions?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Barney, for all of that information, the wealth of information. Yeah, so we have time for questions, and I know people have been asking questions all along the way, but this is your opportunity to ask questions, ask something that that you didn't get a chance to put in the chat. I will even dare say, take yourself off of mute and ask your question. Please. We'll see if we can. We'll control it to the best that we can. But
yes,
and yeah, I don't want you to miss this opportunity to ask your question. Sorry,
absolutely.
Go ahead,
Thank you. No, it's okay. Sorry, I was going to say, and to Sharon's answering of the evidence based. So our You and Me Together Vape Free is evidence based. The Smart Talk mirrors it. So, and I know Sharon from your bar and from Oasis, we can't consider it. But for the rest of you, just in terms of if you're saying, well, how do I know? I love it. I'm already getting emails from people wanting to be on our newsletter. We'll get you on that list. Thank you so much. It's so cool in real life working, right? But the fact that the cannabis mirrors the tobacco is nice, because at least you can feel like, well, if the tobacco is going well, then probably the cannabis. We are actually in the middle of completing an NIH funded trial on the cannabis curriculum that we should have some preliminary data out pretty soon to tell you. So it should be evidence based very, very soon, but our vaping is evidence based. All right.
And yes, to reiterate what Dr. Bonnie is saying, so a lot of the new initiatives, and they are new, so they are evidence informed, and they're not on the New York State evidence-based EVP list as yet, but they will be reviewed so soon to come. But they're certainly able to be used as non-EVPs, promising practice. I don't know if Barbara is on. She could probably just confirm for me that they're on our promising practice list. But they can be used as non-EVPs. And like I said, I'll get you the confirmation as to whether they're on our PPP list. And they're soon to be reviewed by our evidence-based panel. So near future, most likely, we will be seeing them on our evidence-based list. But at the moment, no, they're not. And I know we're getting a lot of questions about that. But we wanted to make sure that we brought you, evidence-informed content and something to use, going into, your new school year. And so we support the curriculums that we're bringing to you.
And
Other questions?
Yeah, and I'm getting something about, can you take pieces from each? From my perspective, you are totally allowed. Our curriculums are set up where you can use one slide, 100 slides, you can mix and match, you can do whatever you want. We just ask that you make sure that you make sure that you give the Reach Lab credit by just keeping the logos on there, making it clear that it came from our lab, that it's not something that you created, not that you're going to do that, but we have had organizations, and as you've heard me say, some of you, Jewel, take our curriculum and use it and act as if it's their own. And so we spend millions of dollars and thousands of hours to bring this to you. And so that's the only thing. You don't have to mention me. I don't need to be named. No person, but just that it came from the lab would be very, very important. And we do have pre-post. So we actually have something new that launched since I even talked to you all. If you sign up, there's a new dashboard. And I, again, cannot talk and chew gum at the same time, so I will find it after, but I don't want to take up Kim and Ben's time. But we now have a pre-post in a dashboard that you as an educator can sign up. You just put in your code. It stays confidential and anonymous, but you put in your code. We see the schools and aggregate information. You only see aggregate information, and then you give the code to the students. And at the beginning and end of the curriculum are the QR codes for the pre-post test. And then you can actually see, not individuals, but as a group, how they're changing. We also have more formal pre-post tests. We are doing the evaluation. If you want to help us with that, that would be great. We're happy to also give you those more formal, comprehensive pre-post surveys, but there is now a built-in dashboard and survey for you. And Sharon, I think that would really be helpful to Oasis too, to know who's using it in what capacity.
Okay, absolutely. And if I could pause for a second, I just noticed that I wanted to give Barbara Bennett the opportunity to come on and introduce herself if you want to. Barbara's our research scientist and director in the Division of Prevention. Throwing you on the spot, Barbara, if you want to come off mute.
Okay, all right, so I'm unmuted now. All right. Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to say a few words. And Thanks to Stanford for presenting this information to us. Not only is it really helpful to understand cannabis, but to understand how we can use the toolkit for prevention. So just really enjoying this, and I'm hoping that you're getting as much out of it as I am. So thanks very much. And as far as the toolkit, whether or not it's an EBP, I put in the chat that it can always be used as a non-EBP. Currently, I believe it is on the promising programs and practice list. That whole list is in review, and it will probably be changing coming up the next year. But as Dr. Halpern said, if they are doing a clinical trial and they have results of the clinical trial, by all means, that can be submitted to OASIS for the evidence-based panel to review, and we can fast track it, and we can get some results on that. So, but you can always use it as a non-EBP, which is 40% of the FTE allocation, and totally worth it. So, encourage you to do that. And I think that's it, Sharon, unless you want me to say a little bit more.
Okay, no, great. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I just did want to circle back. I know Bridget might have had to jump off, but Bridget, if you are still on, certainly would love to have you introduce yourself as well, say a few words, but she may not be on. I'm trying to scroll and see. Yeah, I don't think she's on. She did message that she would have to leave a little early, but she's also the other director of our division. Any other questions? Again, please, if anyone wants to take themselves off mute to ask any of the questions.
And Sharon, I got a question about the fentanyl and cannabis. We are, so at least in California, I haven't seen all the data across the country. We're not seeing cannabis with fentanyl as much as we're seeing fentanyl in other things, but we are seeing it. It is definitely something that we're concerned about. We actually, on our safety first curriculum, I definitely, and I could put that QR code up again if I need to. Let me do that quickly while I'm talking. I definitely encourage you to click on this QR code. Here you go, and click on that, and you'll get signed up also doing that. But on that, you'll find our safety first curriculum. Again, the safety first curriculum, the link will be the same, but check back in 2 or 3 weeks, because what you see now is not going to be the actual curriculum. It's changing a lot. The ideas aren't changing, the content itself, but we're making it cooler and updating some of the information. But we do have a curriculum lesson now on opioids and fentanyl, and another one on psychedelics that you could use and really be able to combine. But we are seeing, I don't want to downplay it, but we're not seeing as much for the fentanyl and cannabis as we are for other drugs being laced with cannabis, with fentanyl. All right.
Okay. I did want to circle back. I saw it in the chat a couple of times. So after today's presentation, we are going to send a link. We'll have the recording. It'll also have the evaluation, which you must fill out in order to get the hours if you are requesting them. We will be using the email that you used to register. So everybody coming on to today's presentation had to register. It will be using that email. If for some reason there's a different email that you want us to use, I will say send that specifically to Lee Bolka, and we'll make sure that we get you the material. Again, the presentation slides, the recording, and the certificate, if you're requesting it. And I don't know if I'm missing anything in the chat. I know Lee or Stephen will help me if we don't want to go past anybody's question. We do have the time for.
There was a question about confused about the pre-post. Why don't you email me separately, just because I have to show it to you, or I'll try to put something in the chat later, but I don't want to take away from Ben and Kim's time on that. So, so please do email me. The other thing is, we can always do a technical assistance, and part of Sharon, me coming out, which we're going to talk about next week when I'm going to do that, will also be for me to be able to sit down and show you in person a lot of this information. But we definitely, I will try to explain that pre-post to you a little bit better. Let me pull some of that out. Or maybe Sharon, maybe the better thing is I give you a little infographic or info on it, and you could share it with everybody. That might be the better way to do it.
Sure, we can definitely do that. And just one thing I saw it in the chat, and I do want to touch on it. I know we were looking to put together like a work group, and I think this is more related to the Cannabis Toolkit, a work group that was going to help to kind of customize the material so that it did fit into like classroom time session, and that it was a real fit for the providers that are using it. So that's still on the table. We're still doing that. Please get us your email and information if that's something you want to be a part of. Just say, hey, I want to be a part of the work group to, customize, the Smart Talk curriculum, for my, for my school or however you're using it. And we will definitely put that together. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to have Dr. Bonnie introduce our next speaker. And again, you'll in for a treat and in for a lot of information as we got from Dr. Bonnie. So sit tight.
Thank you. Great. Well, I am super excited. I think Ben is up next, right? And then Kim. All right. I'm super excited to introduce Mr. Ben Quart. I'm going to read his bio, but it doesn't do him justice. And so delighted to hear Ben speak again. So sober since June of 1996, Ben has been a part of the recovery movement in almost every way imaginable, from a recipient to a provider to a spokesperson. He joined the field professionally in 2007, working for nonprofits, treatment programs, consulting to athletes and organized labor, and so on. He has written a book called Weed Inc., The Truth About the Pot Lobby, THC, and the Commercial Marijuana Industry. He also gave a TED Talk, Surprising Truths About Legalizing Cannabis. In these ways, Ben has remained active in the discussion about marijuana, assisting several states, their efforts to hold back big marijuana, and always focusing on advocacy for recovery. His reputation as being pro-logic and recovery-oriented rather than anti-anything, and widely accepted adopted curriculum on ethical treatment and practices has garnered national recognition. He's utilized by the NFL, NCAA, and other programs to really work with athletes, coaches, and families to develop recovery-oriented policies. Ben transitioned from consultant to CEO of Foundry Steamboat in 2019. He'll tell you more about that. He's a board member of the National Association of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Treatment Providers and their allies. And he's a board member for SAM's Smart Approaches to Marijuana and a faculty at numerous institutes. So with that note, Ben, super excited to hand this over to you, and thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Hey, everybody. I'm going to give you a little bit of a warning that this is my first day back in the office after 2.5 weeks of pure screwing around. And so I sort of forgot how to use my computer, and I don't think I've been fishing. And so I hope I can communicate without too much profanity, and I can kind of get back to work with you guys today. Just kidding, Grant people, I won't cuss at all. I'll cuss a little. I have, when I saw this and saw the description for what I got to talk about today, I really got specific with following along with the description that was put out there. And I want to talk to you about what we're learning in talking to young people and how we're figuring some of this stuff out. The questions that were just going around about evidence-based practices are fantastic and incredibly important. And those of you who've been in this field for a while know that it takes a while to get evidence-based practices out. And this conversation has changed so rapidly that a lot of the times, by the time we are able to have something that is truly evidence-based, it's antiquated. It's using language nobody uses anymore, talking about products nobody uses anymore. So what I'm going to be talking to you about are best practices that we have found on the front lines, and certainly based on good published material, but I'm on the front lines of this, and tell you what I learned. Okay, let me try and share my screen. Okay, we got it. Can you
But
guys see?
Yeah, but go into presenter mode, please, Ben.
Interpreter Samantha, I see you very well.
Yeah, if you just, yep, you're good once you do that. Perfect, thank you.
Hey, Bonnie, remind me what time I have until.
It's about an hour, hour 50, or hour 10 each or so, I think is about right.
Rock and roll. All right, listen, here's a bunch of stuff about me that I'm going to skip over. Yeah, Bonnie talked about some of it. There's more stuff out there if you want to. This is an area of focus. I know what I'm talking about. I work inside of inpatient and outpatient drug and alcohol treatment in Colorado and now in Wyoming, with a particular focus on rural communities. And we are ASAM 3.7 level for those of you who are familiar, and our absolute passion is complex co-occurring mental health disorders. So we work with insurance dependent people who are very sick. Our perfect person has a serious mental health disorder as well as a substance use disorder. And in the last several years, we've had to get a lot better at treating this one particular substance. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. Bonnie did a great job of summarizing the changes in cannabis, and I'm going to go very quickly over this so that I can get to the solution. But I got this cool new chart, and you're the first people who get to see it. So I want to try it out and make sure that it works. So you're going to notice my vernacular change. I appreciated Bonnie's warning about that at the beginning, and I'm actually just about done with a second book. Hopefully it'll suck a little bit less, but it'll have good information in it. The last book really wasn't very good, but I think it said some good things. This one, the first chapter is just the importance of the language that we use. Like we got to stop saying weed. We got to stop saying cannabis. We got to stop saying marijuana, because it's confusing as hell. Because what that even means is nonstop up for debate. Because cannabis it's a plant. It's a plant that grows naturally, that humankind has interacted with for millennium. It's got lots of different components inside of it, and some of them and they all do really different things. We've got to talk about what the problem. Well, I'm here to talk about what the problem is, and not the entire conversation. And to me, to not use specific language about this would be the same as trying to talk to you about alcohol or medicine or whatever, and just using the word liquid. Like it wouldn't work. It wouldn't make sense because of the difference there is between milk and 151, between cough syrup and orange juice. So my vernacular from here forward, and I hope you pay special attention to it, I'm talking about THC now. THC, for those of you not familiar, which I think at this point is probably nobody, is the part of the plant that gets you high. It's the psychoactive component found inside of the cannabis plant. If you don't have THC, you have hemp. You have pretty interesting base for a lot of textiles that played a really important role in early American economy, that literally makes my favorite pair of shoes, and that catches a lot of heat because it looks like its cousin. If you don't have THC, you can't get high. THC is the part of the plant that we have focused on producing and presenting in a commercial industry to get people high. All right, so here come my new charts. Let's hope these work. I looked at them before and I think they do. Ooh. All right, so listen, there's a bunch of lessons that we can learn from this. I just want to point a couple out. These data are the sort of things that statisticians dream of, collected by the same people in the same place using the same equipment, and it's Ole Miss, so it's sound. These are very, very good data, and we should see a continuation out of Ole Miss at some point this year, because unfortunately it was the whole program was shut down federally, because I don't think, well, who cares? Because why? Because politics. So the several things that I want to point out to you are, first, if you can see my cursor here, we start tracking this in 1960. This is a representative sample of cannabis that is taken from every single state in the union, and at this point there's 50 of them in 1960. So we're looking at all of the states, and then they are presenting the what they find inside of it. What we've extrapolated here is THC and CBD. So I want you to first notice where this line is, because this is cannabis. This is weed. This is the thing that when people want to talk about how natural it is, and like how it's one of 50 essential herbs inside of traditional Chinese medicine, and people have interacted with it forever. Yes, heck yes, they have. And what they have interacted with is a plant that looked like this, that had less than 0.5% THC in it. And very importantly, even though we're not going to get too much into it today, it had the same amount of CBD in it. And that's actually really, really important. The plant has less than 0.5% THC. We know this. I mean, it's from the dawn of time. If we follow this line back, we've actually found mummified versions or mummified examples of cannabis inside of tombs from ancient Asia and Africa. Like, can you imagine that? Like, I mean, that's how big of a part of life it was, that even like 2,000 years ago, there was some dying ruler who was like, hey, throw a little bit of that shit in there with me, just in case. It's like, hey, Jesse, when I say words like shit, does that pose a problem? No, sorry. How about when I say words like sticky icky? That'll get complicated, won't it? Okay, sorry if anybody is not used to having interpreters. That plant did next to nothing as far as harm to the human brain and body goes. Now, there are people who will present data different than that. And some of it is arguable, some of it's cherry-picked, and some of it's true. You can never make big, giant, broad statements with this, like always, never. There were, of course, people who bumped into issues with the cannabis plant that had lower versions of THC in it. Those people, in all likelihood, had significant pre-existing conditions. Maybe they were using something stronger. There certainly were some stronger forms of cannabis out there, particularly around religious traditions, island nations, and also in the Middle East. It was they made it stronger for their religious ceremonies. But for the most part, when people were consuming this back in the day, it wasn't a problem. The problem was the way that people were reacting to it. I'm going to get totally distracted if I do too much of this, but I'm going to do it right now. And I want to type in here, no internet cheating. When did we make cannabis illegal in the United States? Anybody?
Right after Prohibition.
Thank you, Charles. 1937. Who said 37 exactly? Yes. right after Prohibition, 1937 specifically. Anybody know? And we obviously made it illegal because it was such a devastating drug and destroying communities and ruining lives and gutting the soul of America, right? Yeah, I wish we were in person. No, we didn't. Yep, exactly. The Tax Stamp Act. Thanks, Patty. I've got all this stuff in the forthcoming book because you have to look about this deep inside of the histories to see exactly why we made cannabis illegal in 1937. Listen, this country's great. It's done a lot of cool stuff. It's also done a lot of stupid shit. And this comes from the stupid shit category. In 1937, you had politicians actually writing things like this in paper, and they weren't ashamed to do this. I've got it in the next book. If we make this illegal, it'll make it way easier for us to get into the jazz clubs and into the barrios. And gee, I mean, who in the world could they possibly be talking about arresting in jazz clubs and barrios, right? So it wasn't made. Charles, I think I'll disagree a little bit with that last statement, but I don't have time to get too much into it. But weed for sure was. So what ended up happening is you've got this plant that's pretty freaking harmless becoming sort of public enemy number one. Then you have this Reefer Madness movie come out, which is total government propaganda, which is nutty. I mean, if you haven't seen it, you probably need to, because it's like it's the worst of fear mongering. It's worse than today's politics. It's got this like well-to-do, nice upper middle class little white girl walking around, and all of a sudden she smokes weed, and boom, next thing you know, she's being sexually assaulted by a black guy and jumping out of a window. Like it's filthy. And it's really important that you remember this. I'm not going off on a little tangent for the sake of this matters. And the reason why it matters is that for decades, we grossly overreacted to and oversold the dangers associated with cannabis. And you got to remember that for what's coming up next. You want to keep people, everybody will tell you, Just Say No was a tragic failure. It depends on the data that you look at. If you look at the immediate data following Just Say No, it was really effective in keeping kids from getting high for a couple of years. But then once they realized that we were really exaggerating the effects and basically lying to them, they would throw out all the other information. And so if you want to keep people from doing something, you terrify them, you scare them. It's the best way, especially with kids. Hey, listen, if you ever smoke weed, you're going to go home and your mom's going to be dead and your dad is going to run off with the secretary, and you'll probably lose an eyeball the next day. That's going to keep like 80% of kids from ever doing it until one of them does. And then when one of them does, he's like, hey guys, check this out. I'm cool. They were lying to us. And then what ends up happening is a loss of confidence in the people who were entrusted to deliver that information. So from the 30s to the 90s, we took away the confidence of the people who should have been listening to medical providers, prevention specialists, and treatment people, because we so oversold the dangers associated with cannabis. Now, as you see, the weed gets stronger. This is a well-informed group, and you New York people, I got sober in DC, and so I'm from the same sort of area, I suppose. We know a little bit more about weed than other folks. Nobody's gotten this in every talk I've ever given, and don't cheat. See this spike at the end of the 70s? Big, giant spike in THC potency. Anybody want to throw in a why? Good guess, Vietnam. Nope. Rockefeller drug. Nope. So this was when, close with the hydroponics thing. Yeah, Charles, you're closer than anybody else on the weed farming. Specifically what it was was a group of guys from Northern California, from the Emerald Triangle, went over to the Middle East and they sowed a bunch of indica seeds into their clothing and brought it back. That was the introduction of cannabis indica to North America. And that's when weed got awesome, frankly. And it got a little bit stronger, and we still weren't seeing a lot of issues with it, but that's when it started to get a bit stronger. Okay, so check this out. Next slide. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, beautiful. You see how this one's broken down? We've got 15 years, and we're doing it in increments of 1/10. So this is over the course of 15 years. Now, when we put that as a whole, you can see, because it's too little at the beginning, you can see where we end up 2011 with the end of those data from national. Now check out what happens when I add the state of Colorado. That's CBD. This is Colorado, which unfortunately we don't have data collection for post 2016. If you take the Colorado Department of Marijuana Enforcement at their word, which I don't, but if you do, the average product in Colorado in 2022 was 63% THC. Okay. That's the difference between THC and weed. So let's get specific and let me, and again, like, if I'm sorry because time's short, and I'm also, and I'm sorry for being so frank and direct with it. And I know we can come up with exceptions to every one of these rules. But let me say it to you this way, that this plant was doing very, very little damage to the human brain and body, with the exception of incarcerating those bodies. This plant was relatively benign. This drug is kicking our asses, and it is so new, and it's changing so rapidly that for us to actually be able to deal with it is a challenge unlike anything we've dealt with other substances. It's changed too much too quickly. And so folks on my side of it, on the treatment and on the medical and on the research side of it, we're kind of like, okay, like we can tell you a bunch about this substance. We can tell you about the 7%, 8%, even up to about 9%. But when it gets to this, some of the best we have is anecdotal. So I'll start to share some of that with you. Before I jump into the next thing, I just want to remind everybody of what addiction is. If you're a clinician, this is what you use. If you're someone in recovery like me, we use different criteria. And when our lives get unmanageable, that's probably the first one. But our clinicians, they got to use something much more objective than that. So they have 11 criteria. If you meet 2 or 3 of them, it's mild. Okay, don't really care too much about that from my perspective. 4 or 5, we're certainly paying attention to you. 6 or above, like where I was when I was using, demands intervention. It's time to do something. So the thing that I'd like to point out to you is that these criteria are not at all substance specific. These apply to THC in the same way they apply to opiates, in the same way they apply to central nervous depressants, to stimulants, to whatever. And one of the things that I used to hear a lot and feel like I'm hearing a ton less of, especially inside of my circles, is people saying like, well, it's not really addictive, and do you actually think that it's addictive? And we've got to always come back to these criteria because it's simply an objective diagnostic criteria. It's nobody's opinion. as to whether or not something is addictive. We look at the diagnostic criteria. We've also got a number of ways that we measure how addictive something is. And that's a really interesting one that I'm going to kind of give you here. So first and foremost about addiction is it's very, very real. And it's not at all easy to treat. And it matters. One of the things that I'll hear from folks often is, and we're going to get to the importance of our language around this, but yeah, well, I mean, it's not like he's addicted to anything bad. He's just addicted to weed. At least he's not addicted to something that could kill him. And listen, man, I'm with you. Like, you give me the choice between somebody I know and love being addicted to THC and somebody I know and love being addicted to fentanyl. Obviously, I'm picking the THC because there's no lethal overdose associated with it. They're not going to be dead the next day from a hot shot or something. However, what that does, and when people say that, is it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what addiction is. Whenever people say things like, yeah, but it's just an addiction too, they don't get it. So let me break it down. If for some reason, I don't think we have any of those people here, but if we do, addiction is when you take something that should be ancillary, something that should be helpful, and when you make it ultimate, like Bonnie's video showed, when it becomes more important to your brain than food, than human companionship, than intimacy, than your physical health. Addiction separates families. Addiction guts communities. Addiction makes us alone in a world where we don't have to be. Addiction takes our souls from us. And I don't care what it's an addiction to. Man, I have seen it with every single drug under the sun. And I'll disagree a little bit with the language they used in that video that Bonnie showed about like addictions to good things. It's I see this as the word addiction for me is when something gets negative and destructive. I've seen it with shopping. I've seen it with obsessive sexual behaviors. You see it with gambling. It's not just substances. There are a lot of different things that can take the place, take a what's a way to say it, that can take an inappropriate place in our lives. And when something does that, when we put an action, a behavior, a substance before our families, before our well-being, it's never just. So let's be careful with the way that we talk about addiction to THC, because addiction to anything is not something to joke about. And I'll tell you that it often is requiring long stays inside of treatment. And I'm going to get to this, but the antipsychotic medications are the trick. I don't know if any of you in this world who are on here now work inside of or know much about the treatment world, but you know, if you've got enough money, you can fix anything. I can send you to programs where I send the guys who start in the NFL and the coaches and their kids, and they can fix absolutely anything. But for the rest of us, the people who have Medicaid or the people who have private insurance, and we have to use that to get our care, there's this thing that happens, even if you're insured for inpatient addiction treatment. And it's an important part of the Mental Health Equity and Parity Act, but it's called a medical necessity. So what you get typically towards the very beginning of your episode is you're approved for treatment. You go in, 2 days later, the insurance company says, okay, prove medical necessity. And it's easy to do if somebody's detoxing from alcohol and they could die. If somebody's detoxing from a benzo and they could die. But with THC, we don't have a lethal overdose or detox associated with it. So what you get are typically, and I can't give you any sound evidence with this because we don't have aggregate data, but I can tell you that my friends in this field and everybody who pays attention to this, they say they're lucky to get 4 or 5 days of approved residential care for addiction to THC. They're lucky if they can get 4 or 5 days. Any of you who work inside of this field, we average 42 days, and I am more than happy to tell you exactly how we do that. You just got to be willing to kick a little insurance company ass, which, since they're the devil, I don't have a problem with. So rates of addiction can be measured in a lot of different ways. The most important one is basically a one-time exposure to, at some point, developing a clinically diagnosable addiction. I'm not going to bore you with all of that, but I'm going to tell you that weed's always been about 10%. 10% of the people who try it will at some point develop an addiction to it. And the last time we got sound data around that was in 2018. It re-emphasized that. And it was a little interesting because it was more if you were younger, but whatever. And I always thought that it showed a great big nothing sandwich, because 10% of the population is genetically predisposed to addiction anyway. Like, it doesn't matter. 10% of us have the genes, and we're going to have a problem with something. So to me, weed was always like, yeah, all right, well, 10%, who really cares? Like, I was pretty concerned with things like methamphetamine that had a 35% addiction rate associated with it. So there's this giant study going on since 2002 with this huge N, and 2018, we get the data again that says that it's 10%. In October of 2020, it's a longitudinal study, so they released it again, and it had gone from 10% to 30%. In 2 years, the rates of addiction to THC had tripled. And look, man, if that doesn't make you sit back and pay attention to this and seriously question some of the preconceived ideas you came in here with, I have no idea what will. Then I'm not able to say anything that's going to get through. Because so many of us, we know this stuff. It's weed, man. What, you want to tell me about weed? Shit. I grew up in the 90s. I grew up in the 80s. You don't know nothing about weed. And what I'm trying to convey to you, you people who are on the front lines of explaining this, is that no, we don't know anything about THC. The kids using today, they don't know about weed. And we don't know about their THC, because our stuff, 10% rates of addiction. Their stuff, 1/3. So anytime you got a longitudinal study where something that big changes, they're going to write. And the authors of this study were like, yeah, listen, it's purely because of potency. If we hadn't had let weed get this strong, we wouldn't be having this problem. We ruined weed for the kids. We ruined it. We let corporate America take it over. And this was my fear from the very beginning, is that as soon as you let corporate America have it, we're done. We've had neuroinhibitors, codone, oxy, opiates for a very long time. It wasn't until those assholes over at Purdue Pharma started selling it to get people addicted that we had the opiate crisis. It's this addiction for profit industry that's doing this. It's not the weed. It's the guys selling the THC. And here's your last thing on the THC and addiction is they need physical detox and medical intervention. And this one's a pretty big deal because I don't think I'll have time to get into it, but I want to share the withdrawal thing with you quickly. This should be the next thing. Like, you can become physically dependent on and go through physical withdrawal from THC. This is where every one of you old heads out there who's been around for a minute should be shaking your head and being like, nope, whatever, impossible. And you're right. A decade ago, impossible, never. Psychological addiction was it. Today, I treat this every single day of the week. Physical withdrawal from THC. If that's not nuts, I don't know what is, but it works really well as a business model. So listen, here's cannabis withdrawal syndrome. Oops. Cannabis withdrawal syndrome is that there's a lot of factors with it, but back in 2012 to 2013, the conclusion of this big study was like, look, it's highly comorbid and disabling, and we've got to be careful about it. Here's one from 2 years ago, and this is much more interesting to me. It says that cannabis withdrawal syndrome affects 47 to 93% of users. It's 93% for the frequent users. This is a big deal. And check out this conclusion. These findings suggest that cannabis withdrawal syndrome appears to be prevalent among regular users of cannabis. Clinicians should be aware of the prevalence of CWS. Listen, most of the medical professionals I work with don't even know what cannabis withdrawal is. Every single person in my field at this point knows what it is, and we're ready to treat it, because if you don't appropriately treat cannabis withdrawal, I don't know, Nancy, read the study. If you don't appropriately treat cannabis withdrawal, then you're not going to be able to get through to them. If we can't get the anybody's withdrawal under wraps, how in the world do we ever hope to get to their frontal lobe to reason with them and help them get sober? Here's the symptoms of it. Here's your conclusions. We had really better get serious about learning this, because patients are leaving care over it. For those of you who are working with young people, I'd like you to keep in mind, and I do lots of trainings just on this. I'm sure there's some on YouTube, I don't know, but your symptoms peak at 3 to 4 days. So you have to prepare for that with the individual, because that's when it's going to kick in. You're going to see a strong resurgence of symptoms somewhere around the 2-week mark, 12 days, 13, 14 days. And the other thing that's typically happening at that mark is people have decided they've got it. You have somebody who's addicted to something stay sober for a week or two, and they know everything that there is to know. And so it can be a scary combination of things when you've got their physical body jumping back in and saying, give me this. And then you got their brain telling them, you don't need any more of this. You got it. You understand. This will impact the female body greater than the male body. And we still don't have any pharmacologic interventions. Bonnie touched on this. If don't use weed at home, THC at home. Okay, let's talk about the solution. I have until, what is this? 2:35. Fantastic. I got 20 minutes. And that's the perfect amount of time for this. And I'm going to stop for questions along the way here. So I think the best advice that I can give you on engaging young people, and I've been doing this since 2012. And I've gotten a lot of experience, a lot more than I wish I had. Some very, very close to home experience with it, with dear friends and kids. And here's what I've learned works is, first and foremost, you have got to consider their reality. If you go into it like how we were raised, those of you who are close to my age, I'm 44 or older or whatever, like if you go into it with the drugs are bad, okay, and they will not listen to you. If you want to come at them in a way that is before anything trying to scare, they won't hear you. If you come in with extreme examples of things like, oh yeah, well, do you know that these guys are making anal and vaginal suppositories now? And do you know that people are having all sorts of psychotic breaks and episodes from it now? That these kids are going to write you off in a second. You got to consider how they grew up. And they grew up in a world whose messaging was formed by the people who are now selling this. They grew up in a world where it's just a plant. It's never hurt anybody. It's not addictive. You can't die from it. In fact, 2 years ago, there was a simple word association study. And they asked a bunch of people, it's just word association. I say ketchup, you say mustard. kind of a deal, or whatever you say when I say ketchup. They said the number one word associated with the word marijuana for 18 to 26. So they say marijuana, and the first word that the 18 to 26-year-olds think of is medical. So if you don't come into it kind of respecting where they're from, you're going to miss it. So the reality is that not only do they not think that it's a problem, that it is, it's a solution. Now, the advantage to this, and let me skip over this one to get you, I'll come back to the other ones, is that if you don't come at them, you still are going to get a chance to speak to them. And I totally agree with Bonnie's I asking them questions thing. In fact, I think that's the smartest way to do it, is to sit down and don't. So for example, at the end of this, and I hope somebody talks in more detail about the mental health issues associated with it, but you don't go down and say, hey, using this 80% THC is giving people schizophrenia. What you do is you sit down and you say, hey, I was in a presentation and somebody said that like these really strong products are messing with people's heads. Have you ever known anybody, or do you have any friends who've ever freaked out after smoking, gotten nervous after smoking, lost their cool after smoking? When you ask stuff like that, it actually invites a conversation. And now, dude, the answer is yes. You're going to get a yes from people, and that's a place to start. So in playing the long game with them, it means that you don't have to solve it all in one conversation. And I would really encourage you to try not to solve it all in one conversation, because you've got a lifetime's worth of their learning to counteract, to educate around, and you're not going to get it done in 30 minutes. That's why I am very comfortable having this conversation go on over multiple days, a week, or whatever, because I want to actually get through to them and not just get a quick reaction from them. So listen, as you're asking more than you tell, the biggest piece of advice I've got for you is don't let them pigeonhole you into the reefer madness stuff. And at the same time, don't be a pushover. And you'll see, here's the example of how this thing can play out. I really pick and choose my battles with this one. So when I'm talking to a young guy who's, say he's smoking a gram of concentrates a day and is experiencing psychosis as a result of it, and I say, hey man, like I'm totally like curious about your use and your mental health because some people in your life are concerned. Can you tell me about it? When he says something like, what, weed? No, that's absolutely, you can't get addicted to weed. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson used to blaze one on the porch every night together. Like, I'm not touching one of those two and I'm jumping on the other. I could care what he thinks about the history of it. Say, really? No kidding. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. But about this, nobody's been addicted to it. So you could stop anytime you want. What would happen if you stopped for a week? What would happen if you stopped for a month? If you even just did a tolerance reset, what would happen inside of that period of time? You don't want to fight the fights that don't matter. The last thing in the world I ever want to get into doing is defending Reagan and Nixon era drug laws. Like it's not something I'm interested in doing, but these kids, they'll gaslight, man. You'll say like everybody's concerned about your use and it seems like your mental health isn't where it should be and your grades are slipping, and they'll say, yeah, but they've been locking people up since the 80s for just having a dime bag. And you see, that's a perfect example of a gaslight. Like if you don't let them, if you pick and choose your battles, you can push back on the important things. And the important thing is, can you stop? What's up with your mental health? Are you living your best life? Are you right where you want to be? Those are the questions that we want to get down to. So here's the easiest way to do this that I have found is create an abstinence challenge. And this is, I wanted to leave enough time specifically to share this one with you because it's the most effective thing that I've found. And again, this is like weekly. I have these conversations with people because a loved one saw something I did or read something or whatever. And after I've had enough conversation with them where I can say to them, I'm a little concerned. Here's the way it plays out. Is you usually ask them something like, hey, listen, if you had to stop for a month, could you? And they're all going to say, yeah, for sure. But, I don't want to because I got whatever. And what I am, where you're ultimately going to have to land with this is, listen, man, if you can't stop doing this for a month, I am actually concerned that it might be a problem for you. And you're going to have to, a lot of the times, get that direct with them. But a lot of the time, these young people are going to be like, oh yeah, totally, I can stop for a month. They think they really believe that they can, and maybe they can. But we want to set that up to see if they can. So ideally it would be 2 months, but you're going to negotiate down to a month. And here's all you're going to ask from them in that month. This is important stuff. You're going to have to test during it, because the last thing in the world you want is like finger pointing and you saying you're a liar and them saying you don't believe me, you're a liar. So set it up for success with testing, even though, and we won't get into the problems associated with the testing. They don't need to know all of those. It's just a really nice thing to establish from the beginning. The next thing that I'm going to really encourage you to ask them to do is to watch all the gender bias that comes through with this one. I'm going to ask you to tell them to keep a journal. And for every time I've done this, I've never once, not once, had a female give me crap about that. Oh yeah, sure, all right, I'll keep a journal. And almost never have I had a dude be like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. In fact, I work for NFL, and there was a player once, and we were doing an abstinence challenge. He was a tough guy, and I told him to do this, and he's like, take a journal and shove it up your ass. And I was like, look, man, here's your first entry. I hope the dude who tricked me into doing this abstinence challenge gets hit by a truck. And sure enough, when I reviewed his journal a month later, that was his first entry, hoping that I got hit by a truck, which was great. But it's a really important exercise. And for the people who are going to balk at it, here's what you tell them. Minimum 3 words. I don't even care what you say. Minimum 3 words. And inevitably, they're going to end up writing about their experience with it. And the reason why this is so important, this is clutch, because we have such a hard time getting through to these folks who've grown up in such a different world than we do. I think that they need to have some self-actualization. There's got to be an epiphany. They have to realize it's got to come from within and not from us. So what ends up happening, and it's fairly consistent with this, is day one, when you review this, day one's going to be like, I didn't sleep all that great, I'm not very hungry. Day 2, they're going to be like, I found my mountain bike and I went out for a hike and it's been awesome and I feel fantastic. And then day 3, they're going to stop writing because they're getting high again. And what you can do then is you can go back and look at that and keep reviewing it with them, because, okay, so what if they fail? So what happens when the person comes to you and says, man, I made it 4 days and I got high? What my reaction to that is, 4 days, fantastic. When's the last time you made it 4 days, man? I'm proud of you. Let's do it again. I know you can get 30. Another key component to this, in addition to the encouraging and sort of the strength-based thing, is you let them pick the start date. so long as it's within reason. You want it to be within like a couple of days or whatever, but that also, it just buys you so much goodwill. And my question to people is always simple. What they say, when do I start? And I say, well, when would you have to re-up? Like, how much do you have that would get you through whatever? Like, I'm good till Friday. But like, okay, why don't we start on Saturday? That's really helpful for them. And now here's the last one. And oh, dear God, Bonnie, after your thing in California, when I said this, that I take some heat from some folks. And I'm sorry if this offends or frustrates, but I'm living in the reality of having 1/3 of my total milieu addiction to THC and trying to figure out ways to help them. Harm reduction cannot be a bad word. I would rather, I'm a 12-step guy, man. I'm an AA and NA guy. I love abstinence. That's when the light, it's when the miracle happens. But at the same time, if I could see less, I would be happy. If your three biggest indicators are age of onset, frequency of use, and potency, those are the biggest indicators as to whether or not somebody's going to have a problem. What you want to do is delay the age of onset as long as you can. Ideally, as Bonnie was saying, frontal lobe myelination sometime in your mid-20s. So somebody starting at 15 is better than somebody starting at 13. It's not good, but it's better. And unfortunately, I think this is going to have to get worse before it gets better. So we want to delay use as much as we can. The other thing we want to do is delay frequency. Weed, THC is different, man. If you were working with somebody who was getting drunk every day, they would absolutely recognize that they had a problem. If you were working with somebody who got drunk a couple times a day, they might still be doing it, but they're going to recognize they have a problem. So there's all sorts of statistics out of Colorado that make for interesting study into the addictive nature of and the importance of it from a business standpoint. But I'll tell you that the majority of the people who purchase THC in Colorado consume an average of 8 times daily. And somehow THC has ended up being this thing where it's like, it's totally normal to, you wake and bake. You want wake and drink? Shit, man, you show somebody who's like, yeah, I wake up and I take a couple shots of vodka, like everybody around them is going to be like, whoa, time out, man. I got to take a couple of drinks on my way into work to get right. I go out and I take a couple of drinks on my break at work. That's how people are treating THC. So we need to reduce the frequency. And you start to see some pretty significant changes in issues associated with it when you get that frequency down to once or twice a month. Again, ideally, we'd see none. And then, of course, the potency. Listen, you want to have next to no problems with THC, keep it below 10%. Single digit THC. The problem with this is that it's barely, if at all, habit forming. And people who sell addictive substances don't like things that aren't habit forming, plain and simple. And that's why this industry has absolutely focused on the concentrates and bumping potency. So there's a really big giant, it's cited at the end of this. There's an interesting study that came out 3 years ago that says that of all of the drugs that we know, all of them, except for hallucinogens, because they don't count in a different category, weed is the easiest one to stop. And of all of the substances we know, weed is the hardest one to maintain abstinence from. And I got some ideas on the why there. I think it's societal and cultural, but it also goes on to say, that same study, that it is easier for people to cut down use a lot of the times than stop. So I have kind of had to come to a place in my own sobriety loving, abstinence preaching world where I encourage less when I have to. I don't know how I ended up getting almost out of time before I could do this. Bonnie, I'm about done, aren't I? What time is Kim starting?
Sorry, we still have an hour and a half of the whole program, so Sharon and all, are we okay for a few more minutes?
And
Yeah, you're good. You're good for a couple more minutes. About a good 10 minutes.
No,
Um,
I won't need 10. I just want to do this slide quick.
Yeah, go for it. Go
sure,
for it.
yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
good.
guys, can I just say, take your time, okay? Really, I can cut back a little bit. Go ahead.
I'll go quick, Kim. This slide, 3 years ago, Springer Publishing put together, asked a doctor named Ken Finn to put together like a comprehensive medical book, desk reference on all things cannabis. So he got experts from every subspecialty of medicine to write about cannabis in their subspecialty. And he asked me to write the chapter on treatment and recovery, which was incredible. And here's some of the things that we learned from it. And these are very important. You guys must start avoiding the microaggressions associated with this. It is never just weed. When somebody comes in for help with this, it's never always just weed. Okay, so you don't use any other drugs. So you think you're addicted to weed. All right, so you've never actually used like hard drugs. It's just weed. No, we never use language like that. We honor and respect where they are coming from, and we tip our hat to it. We say, fantastic, I'm so glad you recognize this and you're coming in. You got to remember too that the progression of THC addiction is a lot of the time slower than other substances. It might take them several years to get to a point where somebody would get quickly with other substances. So by the time they come in, motivation can be very difficult for them to find because they've been doing the same thing for so long. I also need to point out how normalized this is inside of many peer groups. And I think this is maybe one of the most important things that you've got to remember when you're trying to help somebody stop is that a lot of the times their entire identity is built around their consumption. I mean, think of everybody you know, think of the celebrities you know who are, it's a weed thing. And their political identity, their friends, their wardrobe a lot of the time. Listen, man, I ain't never seen anybody wearing a pair of heroin socks or a meth hat. But you see all this stuff all the time with weed because it's a part of our identity. And so what I would propose to you happens all the time is that when somebody says inside of a peer group, hey guys, I'm nervous. I think I might have a problem with THC. I can't stop and I'm vomiting and I'm not okay. My brain ain't right. The first thing that their peer group is going to say is, hold up, we use the same. If he's got a problem, maybe I got a problem. No, man, you can't have a problem. Nobody's ever died from it. It's just a plant. It's not addictive. It's you got no problem with it. They're going to, in fact, actively encourage against help. Whereas even the opiate addicts and the amphetamine addicts, I know people who shoot dope together will encourage each other to get help when they get that realization. If your friend came to you and said, I got to get off the bottle, everybody in their life is going to rally around him and say, hey man, we got to help him get off the bottle. They say, I got to stop smoking crack. I got to stop shooting meth. I got to stop with the heroin. Everybody's going to be like, yes, thank God you're finally there. You got to stop. But that same person says, guys, I got to stop using THC. You're going to have half of his peer group be like, what, weed? What do you mean you got to stop with the weed? You also have to remember and consider the cultures that are different than yours, families, peers. There's a small religious component to it. I've only actually ever worked with one practicing Rastafarian on this. I'd imagine in New York you'll work with more, but we figured it out. But listen, this is normalized inside of communities that in ways that a lot of people can't imagine. Back east, I grew up on public assistance. I didn't know people who looked like me, and I didn't have any resources, and it was just absolutely the norm. We smoked weed with people's parents. We smoked weed with people's grandparents. You sat on the front porch, you talked, you smoked weed. I was it's another professional athlete who, at about 2 months sober, had to go home for Christmas, and we were very close. And he said to me, man, I'm nervous about going home for Christmas. And I said, yeah, holidays suck. And he's like, no, it's not that, it's Cannabis Christmas. And I said, tell me about Cannabis Christmas. And he said, grandma saves up and she buys like a quarter pound. And he said, I probably won't see my cousins, and I absolutely won't see my grandma if I don't go to the house, because she keeps it on the dining room table and she's got all the papers and she's got the Phillies and she's got a bong. And that's just where people go. That's her gift to us for Christmas. So you got to remember this. And I think, let me skip ahead a couple here to the end to tell you that the normalization of sobriety and everyday activities is absolutely key, because a lot of the times people used around everything from eating. I mean, when's the last time they went to a movie and didn't use before, let alone a concert, or ate a meal without stimulating appetite before it? So you've got to take real effort in the normalization of sobriety inside of those things, and you can do it. You also need to be very careful in addressing the triggers that are everywhere, because the biggest one I notice is smell, but certainly it's the conversation around, like, everybody's just always talking about weed. It's always on the news. I don't know about where you are, but like, I'm going to pass 3 dispensaries today when I go get my kid from school. Like, it's going to be around. But the big hope that I'll leave you with in this is that pre-COVID, Marijuana Anonymous was only in major cities. And now, like, there's 10 meetings we could log on to absolutely anytime we want right now. And Marijuana Anonymous is an absolutely amazing tool for people who are suffering. You want to see somebody, like, give them a glass of cold water on a hot day, like, take somebody who's got a problem with THC into an MA meeting, even an online one, and just watch, because everybody is like, oh God, thank you. Yes. So keep these things in mind. There's a bunch of citations and stuff afterwards. I don't know. There's so much that you can talk about with it. And that's the part that you're getting from me.
Thank you, Ben. We appreciate all that you shared, and I just want to say thank you again for your your candid way of presenting. Again, that's what we loved from the conference and why we wanted it for New York State. And we're not gonna kind of have the conversations of, or come from the judgmental standpoint of, we're out to say that, like, this is all, it's all bad, and the horror stories and scare tactics, and we know that's not the right, the right way to go for prevention. And so again, that's what was so refreshing about your presentation. We just know we don't want to go that route, and it's not the right route to go. I like what you said about, consider their reality, because I think that's the only way that we're going to be successful in this, is if we come from their point of view and what they've been hearing and how they've been learning. And again, if we try and scare them and we try to give them the lecture, they're going to turn away from this. And yeah, I mean, I just agree with all that you said and all that you presented. And I just want to give the opportunity for folks to ask any questions, anything that we missed in the chat. Yes, very engaging, informative, and insightful. Absolutely. Just the kudos are just coming through, because I think people think that we're going to bring people here to say it's all bad, say bad things, and tell them it's going to hurt them and kill them. And that's just really not the reality of what what we want you to hear. What we want you to know is, like, what's the best way to go back to back to school and back to messaging. And that's the opposite of what we want to communicate. So, and absolutely why we wanted your presentation. If I'm missing something in the chat, it keeps like scrolling, so I kind of like miss it as it goes by. Any questions, please come, again, I dare say, come off mute if you want to ask your questions. We do have time for some questions. And the slides will be available, as we said. And as you can see, Ben, the kudos are just coming through in terms of the presentation, and everyone's thanking you for the great information and the honesty.
I'm seeing one. What's the medical intervention for detox? There is a drug in phase 2 FDA trials right now that should, it's very, very promising, reducing cravings. Right now, it basically comes down to GI and hydration. The chief concerns that you have are around cyclic vomiting and people not being able, there's all sorts of reasons why, but basically not being able to retain liquids. So the medical piece that we pay the most attention to is acute hydration, because you will have several fatalities every month from somebody who's an acute detox from THC just from the vomiting. How do you recommend approaching the kids? Chantel, that is such a big one, and it's almost like a whole talk. I hope that some of the slides at the end helped, but remember those few things: ask more than tell. Don't fight every fight; just fight the important ones. And kids always do better when they know it's out of a place of love and caring, not out of a place of judging and condemning. When we say, I am concerned for you, I really love you, and I really want what's best for you, and that tends to do a little bit better. Cynthia, I am located in rural Boulder County, Colorado, so right between New York and California. And yes, the book, there's a chapter in the book, Ebony, I think it's the last one or the second to the last one, that's called How to Argue with a 17-year-old or something along those lines. And so it does, but it's 4 years old. And again, I'm almost done with the follow-up. It's old. I hope some of it's still relevant, but yeah. Okay, thank you guys so very much.
Okay, not seeing any additional questions. Actually, I think you may have already logged off. So Dr. Bonnie, I will throw it back to you. Oh, you're still there. I was going to ask a question related to, and if you see this in terms of difficulty getting youth into care, once a marijuana use issue is identified, and yeah, because again, I mean, we have prevention providers, even school-based providers, and they may want to be linking with the right referral places. But do you think that there's any, do you see any issues with getting youth into care? And well, I'll let you respond.
Yeah. In fact, I would like to invite those of you out there who know the region better than I do. Will you, anybody put into chat places that are providing good care for adolescents with a substance use disorder or a cannabis use disorder specifically? Sharon, it's one of the most difficult placements to make because the options are so limited. It is much, much more difficult to work with adolescents than it is adults. And this time last year, there were 6 adolescent programs in Colorado. Today there are 0. They all closed. No, there's not a lot of good help out there, and I'm sorry. So the best thing that I can tell you is get a really good provider involved, a therapist, get a doctor involved. And one of the keys that I'll tell you with the doctor one, especially if there's physical or psychiatric issues, especially if there's psychiatric issues, you want a physician who is ASAM certified or ABAM. So ASAM, American Society of Addiction Medicine, ABAM, American Board of Addiction Medicine, because they've really kept after their education on this. So if you've got to find a provider, a medical provider to help, especially with thought disorders, really make sure they're ASAM or ABAM, and then get yourself a really good private therapist. That therapist is also going to be the person who can help drive care. Unfortunately, none of this is in network right now. So if you've got disposable income, good for you. If you don't, here we go again. We'll see you in a generation.
Thank you for that. And I think, again, this is also a good segue into our next presentation that's going to talk about families. So I will direct it back to Dr. Bonnie.
Great. Thank you so much. And Ben, as always, thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. Absolutely. So thank you, everyone. I'm super excited to present Kim Porter to you, our last talk. So to give you a little bit on her bio, she is the executive director and co-founder of Be a Part of the Conversation, a nonprofit organization in southeastern Pennsylvania. So at least not so far from you all. And Be Part of the Conversation creates effective culture-changing community programs that are designed to significantly increase awareness of the effects of alcohol and other drug use. She is a certified family recovery specialist and is trained to help families move into and through the recovery process. Kim is the parent of someone in long-term recovery, which led her to explore the impact of addiction on families and communities and help create, Be a Part of the Conversation in 2011. So I think it's a perfect next step to this larger conversation that we've all been having. So Kim, take it away and thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bonnie, and thank you all. Boy, do I have the unenviable position of following these two amazing speakers. So, and also, if you've been sitting still for going on 3 hours, please feel free to stand up and dance around and touch your toes and do something right now. I did before I turned my camera back on because it's a long time to sit, but it's been great stuff. And I'm really honored to be with all of you. So I'm going to start to share my screen. Okay, we see the screen, yes? All right, thank you. Appreciate that, Samantha. So yes, we are a nonprofit organization that has been around for 12 years now. We collaborate with folks like you, with community leaders, school district representatives, educators, predominantly families though. We work with a lot of families. We share this belief that we're having these meaningful conversations that are inclusive. They're all around substance use. That is our focus. We get into co-occurring and mental health stuff, but it's predominantly substance use. We support individuals and their families. We educate communities about various substances. So we certainly are talking more than ever about cannabis, but we also talk about opioids and psychostimulants and hallucinogens and alcohol and all sorts of things. We even get into process addictions, but we're always trying to reduce the stigma around all of these topics, because if there's stigma, that's a big barrier. And we know that we're constantly struggling with that. So we do our best to try to chip away at that through our presentations, and our topics are, my former life, I was a graphic designer marketer. So I'm always thinking about, like, you catch more flies with honey. How can we attract communities to these topics that are very fraught with legal challenges and what seem like moral challenges, when we all, and hopefully in this group, know that this is absolutely a very much more complex then that would imply. So we like to provide tools to these families and educators that help them to help young people develop healthy coping skills. We also help families to access supportive resources, treatment when needed, how to access that and navigate that. But I really want to kind of start with why this is important to me, because as I said, this was not my initial chosen career. I have a journalism degree, but I'm also a mom. And this is an old picture from 2002. This is my family. So my son was at the time 14. He is now 34, almost 35. And when he was 14 years old, this is after he was in he doesn't usually wear a bow tie at that age. He was in a band concert. He was in the percussion ensemble. Middle school, we went out to Baskin and Robbins afterward for a little treat. Nice, wholesome family and adventure. The reason this, and God love my family for letting me show pictures of them, probably not their favorite time in life. But the reason this photo is relevant to our discussion today is that the first time Daniel got high, which he is the reason that I'm in this field today, the first time he got high was the year before this photo was taken. He was 13 years old. This is not unusual, whether kids are experimenting or just looking for something. We've discussed this many times in his recovery, but it was completely unbeknownst to his dad and me, but he was already experimenting at the age of 13. His dad is a neurologist at the University of Pennsylvania, highly educated. I feel I'm pretty educated myself. I worked from home as a designer all those years. I was super active in the school activities. I sound a little defensive here, I know, but it's like we were involved, educated, well-meaning parents, and we talked openly about all kinds of things. I had some belief systems that were uninformed. I tried weed, cannabis, THC when I was in my college years, didn't like it, but I didn't think it was a big deal. Frankly, back in the dark ages, I'm 62 years old. That was a long time ago. It probably was kind of what Ben was talking about with that really low potency. So that was a very different time. And I just didn't think it was a big deal though. And so what I didn't know probably filtered into his developing brain and wasn't very helpful, but we really were unaware. We didn't find out until much later in his recovery that he started at that age. The first time we knew anything was when he was 18 years old. So here we are, he's about high school age here with some of his friends. I have everybody's permission to show all this stuff, by the way. This is Daniel. And as I said, he's probably about 17 or 18 years old here. And he went off to college. The first time we knew anything about his cannabis use was when he was 18. And it was when he got in trouble. And it was a long story, but anyway, he got in some trouble and we were shocked. We were like, this can't be happening. I can't believe our son is using drugs. Oh my God. And it was weed. It was cannabis. And he felt really badly about it, but we immediately started lecturing him, and more on that in a little while. But he went off to college. We live in Philadelphia area. He went off to college at the University of Arizona, 2,000 plus miles away. So lots could happen without our watchful eye. And so his substance use escalated dramatically in the 2 years that he was out in Arizona. And again, we knew very little. We definitely saw changes when he would come home. But after, in his second year, he had gotten into some trouble with cannabis possession, got kicked out of university housing, all kinds of things happened. And so the jig was up. We knew that this was not going well. And he dropped out of school. By this time, his GPA tanked and he came back home and lived with us. And he was not Daniel anymore. He was, his brain had been completely hijacked, frankly. He was very addicted to a lot of substances. We knew the tip of the iceberg. And what I also want to point out is this young man here, who is now also in his mid-30s. Chris was Daniel's friend forever, and Daniel was 21 years old when he visited Chris in the city of Philadelphia while Chris was at a university there as a student. Chris called me to say, we're really worried about Daniel's drug use. So long story, we did an intervention. Daniel went to treatment in March of 2010, and I am so grateful to tell you he has maintained his recovery ever since. So he celebrated 13 years of recovery back in March. So, there he is a couple of years ago with his now wife. Daniel got married 2 months ago. They live in Boulder, Colorado. They're kind of neighbors with Ben, which is really cool. Daniel's wife is my daughter-in-law is from Boulder. I was out there for his wedding in June. And fun little fact, this guy, Chris, was at the wedding as the DJ, gave a toast, which by the way, you can give a toast at a wedding without alcohol. And Chris read part of his intervention letter when he toasted Daniel and Chloe at the reception. Anyway, it was a tearful, beautiful moment. It was a really good part of the intervention letter, not the ugly part, but the good part. So we have so much to be grateful for. And I realize every day of my life that our story, Daniel's story, our family's story could be very, very different. We learned so much, even in that first year of his recovery, that we started this organization. I started this with the help of a lot of friends that I got to know along the way in 2011. It's community-based. We just wanted to I really wanted to impart some of the wisdom I learned even in that first year. It blew my mind how much I didn't know that I learned the hard way. And I wish families didn't have to learn the hard way. Wouldn't it be amazing if people would show up for some of these community events when it really is going to benefit them in a preventative way, not the way we had to learn. So organization has 3 legs. I'll just tell you a little bit about us. We last year, for example, in that last fiscal year, 22-23, we held 62 community events, many of them on Zoom. So we have a lot of content on our YouTube channel. We featured 74 speakers just last year. So sometimes we'll have 2 or 3 panelists, just like we have today. We almost always include a person in recovery because you can learn all about the epidemiology, which is really foundational and essential, but it's having that lived experience that humanizes some of these numbers for us so that we can really understand the impact that it's having. We never charge to attend those programs. We have something called parent partnership meetings. I'll tell you more about those later, and I'll also tell you more about our family recovery course. I'll kind of bookend with that at the end. Audience is made up of a variety of people. We're targeting either those K through 12 parents with regard to prevention, educators and administrators in school districts and private schools, healthcare professionals, workplace employees. Faith organizations are a great place to reach an audience who might not normally come to our programs or know about our programs, and predominantly families impacted by addiction. That's who's seeking us out for help and support. So over the 12 years of programming, and this is, you can see one of our breakout groups. We often employ breakout groups after we have a panel of presenters, just to give folks an opportunity to process what they've heard and talk about it. I cannot believe the shift in the conversation that we've had in our 12 years. When we started off, heroin was skyrocketing because prescribed opioids were transitioning over to illicit opioids, and we were talking a lot about that. Certainly that's still part of our milieu and what comes up for our families, but the population is having younger and younger kids, getting more and more addicted to cannabis. THC, as Ben so rightly points out, we do need to consider this THC, but that is really powerful for me to see this change. And the challenges, Ben just talked about access to adolescent care. It is really a huge challenge. It's frightening to me what insurance is making this challenging, how few programs there are, the co-occurrence of psychosis that's being induced by cannabis use. All of these things make it so challenging these days. So what does prevention look like from a community perspective? So we have lots of wonderful evidence-based programs for students, so a lot of you prevention providers, I'm sure, are going into schools, talking with kids. So we have these kids that we want to prepare them for life. So I like to think of what our organization does is we kind of are more like the scaffolding around these children, right? So who makes up this scaffolding? Well, it's all the grown-ups in their lives, right? All the teachers and mentors and the family members for sure, the health providers, and so on and so forth. So this is, it takes a village, absolutely. So all these folks need education around this. We were talking briefly before we got started with you today I would love to see more medical education, more continuing medical education offered for healthcare providers around this, because there's so much misinformation when that word medical, I'm so glad Ben pointed that out, the word medical marijuana really did complicate things for us. So education of all the scaffolding around the child is really key. And then hopefully we have equipped them to launch and move out into the world, and we've done the best we can, right? But I thought, let's just kind of take a look too at what parenting looks like. I found a couple of studies that were really interesting to me, looking at parental influence on substance use. And I just thought these were very interesting little lead-ins to the challenges of parenting. So I don't like to read slides, but I'm going to read these because there are a lot of words. Parenting is an extremely complex and challenging activity that incorporates many specific behaviors by an adult to influence a child throughout various ages. How's that influencing your children working out? I wonder, for all the parents out there. Also, it requires the caregiver to consistently demonstrate a constellation of robust attitudes, including being extremely motivated, helpful, responsive, insightful, and strategic in their presentation. Whilst parenting may be more of an art form than a science, it has been widely observed that it plays a pivotal role in shaping substance use behaviors in offspring. No pressure there, right? I mean, and how many educators that I've talked to have said, like, oh, if these parents would just listen to us and get it together, we're doing the best we can. Sometimes we have the same mental health challenges our children are having, right? So this is a tall order for us parents. But boy, do I wish I knew then what I know now. It could fill a stadium, because we know that kids who learn about the risks of substance use from their parents are up to 50% less likely to misuse substances. This is why it is so important that we support parents and increase their awareness about substance use. So we have a prevention program for parents whose kids are in grades K through 5. It's called Have You Had the Conversation? And what we do in preparation for this program is we ask 5th grade health teachers to hand out index cards to their 5th grade students and say, don't put your names on these, but I want you to write down any questions you have about drugs or alcohol. And the teachers collect those up and they hand them out, or they type it up and they send it to us. And we print them out on blue paper. And when we're in person, we put them on everybody's chair. If we're virtual, we'll share a PDF and a link. And we have collected hundreds of responses from 5th graders throughout our region over the years. And I've just laid out a few of them here for you. And of course, I chose some that really tend to relate to cannabis use and that were kind of frequently asked questions. So just take a look at some of these. There's confusion about the word drugs, especially when you're talking medical marijuana. Why are, if you can, let's see, where's the one about how come weed stops stress? Interesting, right? What about drugs? Advil is a drug, heroin is a drug. There's a lot of distinction there, but in a young person's mind, that can be confusing. What happens if you smoke weed as a kid, ages 9 to 12? They're very specific questions. It's all over the place. And I really recommend this exercise if you have an opportunity to do it, just because for the parents, it's so powerful to pick up this blue piece of paper in your little community when we can tell you these are your community's 5th graders' questions. So they're wondering, did my child ask any of these questions? How would I answer some of these questions? So that's where we get into what would you do if your child asked you some of these questions? And it can be daunting because we don't have a lot of information. Even the scientists studying this don't have all the answers about this. But we like to invite this because we want our kids to talk with us and not necessarily their peers, because there's so much misinformation out there, or just Googling it, because I'm sure if you've ever search for any of this information, the stuff that comes up when you put in cannabis, you've got Leafly and all of these resources that are from the cannabis industry that we're more than happy to give their perspective. We're looking at peer-reviewed, double-blind studies. There aren't enough out there, obviously, on cannabis, but we're doing our best to give people as much solid information as possible so that if our child asks a question, we can say, I don't really know the answer, but I'm going to do some looking into that and I'm going to find out and get back to you about it. And we also like to think about the fact that let's build some skills really at a young age with emotional vocabulary words, because we hear this a lot from educators that in the absence of strong emotional vocabulary, young people might use some behavioral vocabulary, which might look like reaching for some substance that makes you feel better and that's easily accessible, or just picking up the cell phone and scrolling and Snapchat or whatever it is, just to get out of our head if we can't express our feelings and thoughts. And so we have this handout that has a whole lot of emotional vocabulary words. And this could be whittled down for age appropriateness because some of them are pretty advanced words. But that you could stick something like this on a fridge and say, let's pick a word and tell me, how do you think it feels to feel frustrated? Have you ever felt resentful? What does that feel like for you? Or can you tell me a time that you felt grateful? And parents can even use our own first language and say, like, I think I may have been a little judgmental with my friend yesterday. So being transparent about that and using those vocabulary words and really making that a norm in our home, just to share those emotional feelings and talk them through. And I'll talk more about how we can then respond when we hear some of those things. It might be scary for us to hear. If we hear our child say, I'm worried about grandma because she hasn't been doing well, our reaction might be, don't worry about grandma, because we don't like to have our kids worrying. That doesn't feel good for us. So we'll say, like, don't worry about grandma. She's going to be fine. They just said that they're worried. Let's talk about that, right? So we can lean into that. One of the initiatives that we have that I'm so grateful for with one of our county contracts is the Youth Marijuana Prevention Project. It's a 5-year initiative. We're in our 5th year, and I'm sad to tell you that we have not eradicated teen cannabis use in our 4 years and 1 month that we've been doing this. But we've really had a lot of deliverables associated with this. And one of them is there are many, but we have community events around it. We have a media messaging campaign that I'll tell you more about. We have some school policy forums that we talk about how to adjust school policy, all sorts of things. But we like to look at, okay, what is the public opinion out there at adults? And this is some Pew Research Center did some studies over some different periods of years, looking at adult public opinion on legalizing cannabis. And this is a 50-year period. You can see that the beliefs about illegality, that it should be, that is dramatically decreasing, and legalization is dramatically increasing. Probably no surprise to anyone here. And then another study was done 3 years later in 2022, which showed that 89% that it used to say something out of 10, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 US adults felt cannabis should be legal in some form, whether it's medical or medical and adult use. We like to say adult use, not recreational. Recreational sounds way too much fun, so we call it adult use, which is what it is. So that's pretty dramatic. We're swimming upstream here, a lot of us who are in the prevention field. So we have this program, part of that Youth Marijuana Prevention Project, which is called Who Knew? And we decided that if we're going to be on social media, and that's what was one of our tasks in this grant, we need to make sure that we're having real conversations with real people and backing it up with science. And so we're driving folks to this page of our website. By the way, I'm going to be sharing all these links at the end of my presentation in the chat. I've got them ready to go. I'll just paste them in as soon as I finish my presentation. But on this page, we have videos that you can find that we've done over the last couple of years. And that it also on this page has loads and loads of scientific research, lots of stuff that backs up all the questions that are asked by young people. And one of the things that we did to prepare for these videos is we asked, we put together this survey, and we sent out a survey to high school students in our region. And it was giving them an opportunity to, again, anonymously ask any questions specifically about cannabis. And they could ask questions of 4 different subject matter experts. The experts were a person, I'm going to go back because I think I have some notes here for myself. Yes, we had a physician, we had a person in recovery, we had a parent, and we had an outpatient therapist. So when the students were asking their questions, they could direct them at any or all of those subject matter experts. And so we videotaped young people who volunteered to ask these questions on behalf of the anonymous teenagers. So here you're going to see a very short video of a question that was frequently asked, and it won't be surprised to you what the question was, by our medical professional. She is a physician who works with adolescents. So I'm going to play this video.
Is it as addictive as other drugs such as nicotine, and is it even addictive at all?
So short answer is yes, marijuana is definitely addictive. In terms of relative addiction potential, it's hard to really tease that out because addiction is related to so many different things. But we do know that marijuana is in the top 10 of addictive substances that humans use. You might be surprised to know that about 10% of teens that start using marijuana go on to become addicted. And this really shocking figure is because of what I had mentioned before, is that your brain is still being built really into your early 20s to mid 20s. And so what that means is that anything that's a reward pathway is becoming more and more efficient. So we hope that the reward pathway is exercise makes you feel good, so then you get in the habit of exercising, or studying helps you achieve a goal, so it positively reinforces studying. What we don't want to have happen is that the reward pathway is you use a substance, it makes you feel good, and so your brain is registering that as a reward and building a very efficient pathway so you keep doing that behavior. Another thing to think about with substances that are addictive or you become dependent on is it can be associated with withdrawal symptoms. And we do see that with marijuana. When people stop using cannabis and marijuana after using for a prolonged period of time, they can be irritable, have depression symptoms, feel anxious, feel shaky, get chills, break out in sweats, have a stomach ache, all sorts of things that are well described withdrawal syndrome when marijuana use is stopped. And another note too is this can be in any form. It can be in edibles, smoking, vaping, any form of marijuana use. So one is not safer than the other with regards to addiction potential.
So we're so grateful for folks like Dr. Offit, who presented some of that information. We have a lot more on that page that I mentioned earlier. But also I mentioned this earlier, that in our community events in general, we do like to have people who are in recovery. Albert is a young man. He's not necessarily in recovery from addiction, but he is somebody who previously used cannabis, was very willing to be with us and be recorded. And so we're so grateful to him. At the time of this recording, he was 18 years old. He was a senior in high school. And before this clip that I'm about to show you, he was describing his progression and that he had initially engaged in cannabis use because he had a lot of anxiety. His friends told him how helpful it was to them, and it just sounded pretty helpful to him. So he tried it out, and it really escalated and progressed. And so at this time, it had been at least a year since he had used any cannabis at all, and he was sharing his thoughts. So we have some parents on that program and asked this question. So how is it best to tell adolescents that weed is not the answer to anxiety when they feel like it is? And here's Albert's response.
Probably the best way to kind of tell someone that's like dealing with like mental health struggles and like trying weed is sort of just showing them all the other options, because I feel like as soon as like someone gets their like mindset on it, like, oh, there's this like super easy thing that you can do to like just make it all be better, but kind of just showing them that like long term, like weed only sort of lasts for however long you do it, and it's like a dependable kind of like substance. So you have to kind of like tell and like show your children that it's not like sustainable for the long run, and that you kind of have to work through the bigger mental health issues before like trying anything else, or because that's not really going to work. Even with like regular like medications, you still need to put in the work to make yourself change before some outside substance can help you.
And I love that last thing that he said. And so I've got it repeated here for you. I mean, I'm a total Anna Lemke fangirl. So if you haven't read Anna Lemke's, but in Stanford, I'm so jealous, Dr. Bonnie, that you probably know Dr. Lemke. She's an absolutely amazing speaker and psychiatrist who works in the addiction field. She wrote the book Dopamine Nation: Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence. That tagline, the finding balance in the age of indulgence, that is where we are. She has probably 80 some podcasts just recently that she's been on, and I think I've hit every one of them. But she talks about the overwhelming abundance we have in our culture, in this wealthy culture. We've got all this misery and anxiety and stress, yet we've got everything at our fingertips, instant gratification, Amazon, don't get me started, all of that, right? But those outside substances that Albert is talking about are just so readily available and so normalized, as you've heard the other speakers say. So, what can we parents do? Sorry, there we go. What can we parents do? How do we encourage our kids to put in that work that Albert mentioned to address those inner struggles? Well, we can start again really young. We can talk about mindfulness. There's so much evidence that shows that mindful practices can start early. What a great practice to engage in, and those really good connections in our brains to saying, like, I need to go meditate for a while. That would be a wonderful thing to develop. So we can encourage that in our children. We can model healthy behavior. I love the opportunity. Like if we still have children at home, we come home from work, it's the end of a rough day, and we say out loud for them to hear, I am so stressed out. I've been looking at screens all day. I feel like I need to go take a walk. Do you want to come with me? Or who wants to play backgammon? I'm so tired of looking at my phone or thinking about work, So to express that I struggle with this stuff too, and here's how I model that, rather than what we're culturally are so used to is like, pouring a glass of wine, running for a beer, that kind of thing, and maybe even articulating that, posting it on social media. So we really want to model those healthy behaviors that we can exhibit with our kids. So that they can see that, because let's hope that they want to emulate us in that way, instead of the ways that we wanted to be a grown-up and drink like a grown-up or smoke like a grown-up or smoke weed like a grown-up. We can also have very clear boundaries around cannabis use. I know that there seems to be a tendency to compare cannabis use to alcohol use. And just as we often hear, or I don't know about you, but I often hear parents say, well, I'd rather have my kids learn how to drink responsibly at home. I have to believe that there's a lot of that philosophy being applied to cannabis use. Or here in Pennsylvania, we don't have adult use is not legalized, but medical marijuana is here. And we know a lot of times parents are saying like, well, it certainly helps me with my sleep or my stress and anxiety. So I figured it's available to my children. I can be a caregiver and get them a card. So that's what we're doing. So we can say that's really, we're going to look at the science and recognize that this is not healthy for their developing brains. We can be at home when they have a party. We can be transparent about family history. If we have substance use disorder in our family, if we have gambling addiction in our family, we can talk about these risk factors very openly, just as we would talk about hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, and say, we have to be thoughtful about our diet and exercise. We also have to be thoughtful about the substances that we're putting in our body. Creating fun activities that don't involve substances so that kids' friends want to be at your home. They're not bored looking for things to do. Hopefully, once they mature, they'll find their own healthy, fun things. We can create those when they're younger. We can listen to their thoughts and feelings about cannabis respectfully, and more on that in a little bit when I talk about some of those skills that we can develop with communication. If we hear incorrect information, we can explore it. As I mentioned earlier, we can definitely do some research, and we can share with them what we've learned about this and point them in the direction of the science and not the hyperbole or the cannabis industry information. I love that Ben brought up Reefer Madness. I didn't even know he was going to. And look, I threw it in the slide. We need to find some middle ground here, right? We don't need to be This is the coolest thing ever. It's so much fun to be high. Cheech and Chong, thinking if anybody's old enough to remember who Cheech and Chong were, these were movies that were very big in the 70s, maybe into the 80s, I guess. I mean, now I see Tommy Chong is like all over the cannabis industry selling stuff, but this is like this is harmless and fun for you versus the extreme opposite end of it's the devil's botany. We're all going to die, you know, so we've got to find some middle ground. I love what Ben said about meeting them where they are and being respectful when we speak to them about this. It is truly so important. Here's a video that is very old. It's only like 30 seconds long, but it's from the Partnership to End Addiction. It's been around for a while. I love it. I'm going to play it. It's really short.
Awkward confrontational accusation. Automatic denial. Skeptical response. Phony excuse you'll see right through. Angry, irrational statement I'll regret later. Fake emotional whimper. Desperate, confused, empty threat.
Yep, that was me. That was me when I was freaking out. And I love that she's holding a bag with her. It's obviously several years old, but I love, thank you to the partnership to End Addiction, because they've got some great content, and that's one of my favorites. But yeah, this was me when we figured out that Daniel was getting high. I freaked out. His dad freaked out. We started with the lecturing. Daniel was high when I was talking to him about why this was such a bad idea. That was not effective communication. And what I've learned so much about this, and one of my favorite things that I've learned is this acronym WAIT. This is a favorite of many of our family members. They say if I was going to get a tattoo, it would be this one, WAIT, which stands for, why am I talking? You know, this is what exactly, you know, Ben just described this, like being curious and listening. I think Dr. Bonnie talked about it as well. It is so important that we get curious and listen. Even when there's a crisis on a plane, we are told we must take care, you know, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. We must take care of ourselves before we're capable of effectively caring for or communicating with our child. But when I feel fearful about my child's decisions, I have this big compulsion to try and change their thinking. But wait, why am I talking right now? Have I thought about what I want to say? So we have these kind of communication tips for you. One is, are you even ready for the conversation? I wasn't ready. I just found out my son was high. He's 18 years old. He's leaving for college in 3 months. Again, this is a long time ago. I was not ready for that conversation. And yet I sat him down and I'm like Charlie Brown's mother, wah, wah, wah. Well, he was probably thinking, boy, do I want to go get high some more because I'm freaking out that my mom just figured this out. So that was not the time. I was not ready for a conversation. I wasn't even ready to talk, let alone have a conversation. When we're ready for that conversation, we need to make sure that we're ready to listen, to really hear what they have to say. Please help me to understand how you believe this use is helping you, and acknowledge and respect their feelings, you know, and then as they're responding to us, what's my body language? Am I doing this? Am I like, oh my God, what were you thinking? Or am I appearing open, inviting more truth and honesty? Yes, I can handle this. It's okay. I'm just hearing what you're saying. And we're going to talk more about reflective listening in a moment. But also, you know, there's number 4 is consistency. Being on the same page as the other parent can be very challenging. So even if behind the scenes we're not completely aligned, let's find some common ground and then present a united front with our child as best we can. So to help families with this, we'll kind of break it down into some triage. So we have these 3 buckets where we get into like, you know, where are we in our child's use here? So we'll start with bucket A. Bucket A is they've tried a substance. They've done some experimenting. So perhaps they did, but they were truthful about it. This is a win immediately, right? So again, thank you for your honesty. They're willing to have us look through their backpack or their bedroom and no fight there. That's a really good sign. So we're still in bucket A, right? No big change in the friend groups or the physicality or the mood or any of that. But we can use a lot of positive reinforcement and acknowledge their transparency and their good behaviors. We can also do some role playing, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. Bucket B is, okay, they're still using, they did it again, they got high again. Now we're laying out some consequences, and consequences do not have to be negative. A consequence might be, we think it might be time for you to talk to a therapist. We love you so much. We want to support you because I don't fully understand why you're still doing this. So let's get some help with this to understand it. But we can stay calm. This is a red flag that we're getting, that there's something going on, but we don't have to panic. And again, I'm going to talk more about motivational interviewing in a bit. That's when we can employ some of those tools. Bucket C, okay, now this is definitely outside of our wheelhouse. This is not something that I'm a parent and comfortable handling on my own. So I'm seeing changes in their body, weight, their sleep, some of those warning signs that we've seen of real change, they're isolating, their hygiene is gone, like all of these kinds of things. We cannot do this on our own. So this is kind of, if we look at, you've had problems with school, you got in trouble, you lost your license. This is the definition of addiction, right? Is continued use despite negative consequences. It is time to get help in some way. So please, whether it's getting assessed, using medical assistance, insurance, whatever is at your disposal, to get some help with that. And then seeking out that treatment in a really appropriate way. And I'll just tell you a quick story about our own situation with Daniel. Before we knew the extent of Daniel's drug use, we knew about cannabis, and that's all we knew. We didn't know that he had escalated to a lot of other substances when he was still out there in Arizona at college. He got in enough trouble that we had to take him to see a therapist. So we took him to a mood and anxiety disorder specialist who our daughter was seeing, because she was great with her. My daughter doesn't have the substance use disorder. We weren't ready to look for a professional who understood addiction. We weren't ready. We didn't know enough about his use. We were in some denial, I'm sure. So we took him to the wrong person. She's a perfectly good therapist for a certain kind of client, not for our son. Because he said, yes, you can bring my parents in when we're finished talking. He didn't tell the truth. He told her just enough. And she brought us in, sat us down in front of Daniel and said, come on, didn't you guys get high in college? I mean, completely validated what he was doing, completely invalidated us, made us feel that we were overreacting. We were not ready to take him to the right person. If our child had any other symptoms of a medical condition, we would take them to a specialist to rule out the worst case scenario. And if in fact there was a bigger problem, then we would get appropriate treatment. We didn't make that decision. And I often encourage parents, please don't be afraid when you're on Psychology Today or however you're searching for your treatment provider. Don't be afraid to look for that addiction counseling. Our children might not love that idea. They're not probably looking at Psychology Today. We're just going to tell them this is who we found and this is where we're going. And so we can get that professional help. So just a few talking points for working with young people. Addressing social norms. Kids love to tell us if they're using a substance. Everybody does this, right? We hear this a lot from young people. We know it in the surveys that they take, that they believe that everybody's doing it. And then in the part of the survey that says how many are actually doing, it doesn't add up, right? So the perception is important though, but we can refute that and say, you know what, not everybody actually is doing this. Those role-playing and refusal skills are so important because that's experiential learning. This is practicing what I'm going to say when I'm in a situation that I really don't want to engage in substance use, but I'm feeling that pressure. So acting it out, even if they're not comfortable doing that with their parent, encouraging them to do this with a trusted friend who also doesn't want to use substances at a party or with other friends, to play that out, like what will we say to get out of this situation, or to message our parents that we really would like to come home now, that sort of thing. So role playing that is really helpful. Ben talked about this so beautifully. Do not sensationalize this. No reefer madness. We've lost them immediately. If they tried it and they loved it and we're telling them it's awful and it's so bad for you, we are not valid in their mind. So we don't want to sensationalize any of this. And let's not judge the nephew who's been getting in some trouble with smoking some cannabis. Because if they hear us being judgmental about someone they care about, or just about anybody, even if it's a celebrity who has a fall from grace, that's an opportunity to say, wow, I sure hope that person has people who love them and will support them and get them the help that they need. Sounds like they're really struggling. And scared tactics. There's so much evidence that this just does not work. We cannot, there's this disparity between like what I see you telling me about this deadly thing that's going to happen to me and what I believe I would never do, so there's just a chasm of disbelief in there that it just is not effective. So don't even try it, right? I love this cartoon, right? We want to keep our kids in a bubble. Please be safe. That's just not realistic. It's just not, we're robbing them of opportunities for growth, to learn, to have those life experiences that teach all of us a lot of hard lessons, but really important lessons. And, we all know about helicopter parenting, but this is a parenting style that's definitely getting some traction. I definitely am in this camp. I did some snow plowing myself. I did not like to see my child in pain. Nobody wants to see their child in pain. And so when I knew that Daniel was struggling with drugs, by the time I knew that, I was afraid to poke that bear. I didn't want to have a fight with him about, you never make your bed, you never do this. I don't, I want to like be the reason he wanted to go and get high, as if my asking him to make his bed or empty the dishwasher is the reason he would go and get high. That was my thinking though. We see our kids hurting and we just want to make it better for them. So somehow that will magically have them stop using this substance when they're already addicted to it. We often have this internal tug of war between, am I helping? Am I hurting? Am I fixing? Or am I controlling or trying to control? We have a pediatrician here at the Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania who's just amazing. His name is Ken Ginsberg. He's published some books about fostering resilience. We had the honor of having him speak with us years ago. And I just love this quote. I like to think of myself as a lighthouse parent, reliably there, totally trustworthy, making sure he doesn't crash against the rocks, but committed to letting him learn to ride the waves. I love that. Also love that Dr. Bonnie talked about this. Yeah, we know that none of our brains were fully developed until we're 25. Nobody wants to hear that when they're under 25, that we're still, not fully developed yet. No, but what we can say is something very affirming, very positive, which is, you are so lucky. If I had a do-over, man, I would teach my brain all kind of things when I was your age. This is the perfect time to build great brain chemistry. What wires together. So that meditation, that exercise, that getting outside, that learning, our brains when we're young are so wired for learning. That's why we're good at risk-taking when we're kids. We can learn languages and math and sports and all kinds of skills, and look at it as a positive, and let's not muddy the water, especially when I love to share this with parents who might be in that philosophy of, I'd rather they do it at home. No, you're giving them permission. You're saying that this is okay for your brain. It's not okay. So a little bit about motivational interviewing, and there is so much. We could do like a full day. There are full day presentations about motivational interviewing. Miller and Rolnick are kind of the masters of this, and this is their definition of MI, motivational interviewing. And I'm going to share a link where you can learn a whole lot more about it. But I do think it's helpful when we're talking to families about this. And when we give the families these tools for motivational interviewing to talk with their kids. And among the many acronyms and tips for MI is one that I'll share with you. It's kind of easy to remember, OARS, O-A-R-S, which stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summarizations. So just a few samples of some of these. An open-ended question might be, how has this affected your day-to-day life? And again, being really calm as they respond to this. What do you think you'll lose if you give up cannabis? How do you hope I might be able to help? These are open-ended questions, not yes or no, but we want them to expand on some of these. Some affirmations might be, wow, you really worked hard this week. I can see how much you care about cannabis. They care a lot about it, right? I appreciate that you're being honest with me. These are important. They feel validated. They feel heard when we affirm what we are seeing, the positives that we're seeing. There's a few kinds of different reflective statements that we can make. So straight or a simple reflection. So the first line is them talking, right? The green is a young person talking. So I don't really think that weed is my problem. So a reflection might be, so you feel cannabis use hasn't caused any real problems for you. Well, sometimes I feel kind of groggy or lazy about schoolwork. So hopefully we're eliciting an honest response to that reflection of what they just said. A double-sided reflection is you'll see kind of how this works. So if they would say something like, I know I'm not supposed to be smoking. I want to make everyone happy and get my grades up, but I really don't think it's that big a deal. It's just weed. So our response, we want to be careful to use the word but as our conjunction, because that but negates everything that came before the but. So we can say, so to you, smoking isn't a big deal. And at the same time, it's causing problems for you. So that's a double-sided reflection. An amplified reflection is taking a negative that they're saying. So if they have said something that's pretty negative, like this one, I don't know why you're freaked out. This is not a big deal. So we would then amplify that, and you have to be very careful to not sound sarcastic when you say this, but you're just kind of making it a bigger statement and saying, it sounds like you feel that no one should be worried about you, and there are no ways that you could improve your well-being right now. So that hopefully invites them to take it down a notch and say, like, okay, let me reframe that and let me tell you what I'm actually trying to say here. And then summarizing is really important too, because it's sort of let me make sure that I've got this right. So we're conveying that we care about what you are hearing from them. We're redirecting if they go off on a tangent, they start going off on like, who gave them the vape pen and it really wasn't their fault and I got it from this dispensary, whatever that is. So not important, right? So let's redirect them with that summary. Like, let's get back to what you were saying before about this. Did I hear this right? And just by making sure that we're on the same page, by asking that, is there anything you want to add or correct in the summary that I'm giving you? So again, you can learn a lot more about it. Here's a QR code, but again, I'm going to share this link in the chat when I'm finished presenting. But this is not an intervention. This is just a communication style. It's something that we can pair with a lot of other ways, and we can intervene by using some of these, but it's just so useful, I think, to have motivational interviewing in our pocket. So if there is some need for help, whether it's professional, whatever, and we recognize that we have this challenge with our loved one, we have our person that we love on the left. This is my son, for example. This is the person that we have identified having a substance use disorder. And here are us parents over here with all of the emotions that come with that. And if we're so fortunate, after months of being enmeshed with them and them using the substance, and we lose sight of all of our needs, right? And we're just mired in this really unpleasant place. They go off to treatment. Yay, that's a win, right? We're going to see those 28 days, just the start. But then we parents are left with all those feelings. We're still stuck with it. And we think that 28 days of treatment or that IOP that's gonna do the trick, and they are never gonna do this again. And I'm gonna be fine now. But really, are we? Because they're gonna come back home and we're gonna have a lot of these feelings still sitting with us. And they may not stay abstinent from that substance, and they may really be struggling, and now you're still struggling. And so we really like to look at all the help that we need. We need all of this. We need each other. And we also really need professional help. So we need to get help for ourselves. We family members often benefit from professional counseling, an objective person to help us see how this has impacted us. I have trauma from my son's substance use. I have trauma from his escalation of drug use that got him to the point that I wasn't sure if he was going to live, if he was alive when I found him in the game room the next morning with the TV still on and hard to wake up. I have some trauma from that. So I really needed to get some help for myself. Thankfully, we now have so many options online. There's a lot of virtual telemedicine, telehealth, thank goodness. So that is an option for many of us. And family therapy is so very crucial, especially if we're not aligned as parents, if we're on different pages. A lot of times we'll have one parent who thinks you're the reefer madness parent, you're crazy. If I did this in college, I'm fine. So they're going to be fine. This is what kids do. We need an objective person to help us with this. I work with families a lot. I can say 2 sentences about this and they get it. Whereas the spouse saying it for the last year and a half isn't connecting because they have baggage, they have a family history, right? It's so much more complicated in their relationship. And so having that objective other person, peer coach as I am, I'm not a therapist, but I do peer coaching. So that is such an important person to have guide us through this kind of muddy water. There are so many opportunities for support out there. Al-Anon and Nar-Anon have been around for a very long time. Smart Recovery is for people with a substance use disorder, but they now have friends and families meetings. So this is an evidence-based program that's not 12-step. That's very interesting. I've attended some of those groups. Ben mentioned a Marijuana Anonymous, which is amazing, much like Alcoholics Anonymous, 12-step program. Now there's something called Maranon. Don't know if you know about this, but there are 9 meetings happening every week. I've had the great fortune of meeting some of these folks who started this. I believe they started in Pueblo, Colorado. They have 8 of those meetings are on Zoom. Only 1 is in person. I think that's in California. But there's one meeting specifically about co-occurring disorders. There's another meeting on Saturday mornings specifically for loved ones whose person addicted to cannabis has cannabis-induced psychosis or cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. So there's actually a Saturday morning meeting specifically for those family members. So thank goodness for peer support and for these mutual aid groups that help so many of us. And at the beginning, I mentioned that in our organization, which is called Be a Part of the Conversation, we have these other programs. And one of them is Parent Partnership. That is very much like an Al-Anon or Nar-Anon, except that it's not 12-step. It is just parents. We have crosstalk. If you know anything about 12-step, you don't have crosstalk. We parents, we like to have crosstalk. We like to have a dialogue. And so I strongly encourage those 12-step Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, Maranon meetings. These are just for we parents and guardians and grandparents. We have 18 meetings every week. 7 of them are in person in this southeastern Pennsylvania area, but 11 of them are on Zoom. 2 of those 11 are for parents of teens. You can find them on this page of our website, which I'll share with you. You're welcome to attend. Again, no charge to attend any of these. We also have a family recovery course. We spent a year and a half developing this. It is a 3-part course that is capped at 12 participants. Again, no charge to attend. We have counties funding this for us. We have a foundation that helped us develop it. We worked with clinicians to develop it. It is peer-led. We have a 94% retention rate across all 3 parts, and this is with no financial skin in the game. So we are definitely feeling some really great outcomes. Here's just a little bit of the feedback that we've been getting. It is amazing to me to see the transformation in a family from part 1 to part 3, from the day they walk into a support group meeting to the month later, the 6 months later when they're chairing the meeting. It is a beautiful thing. Our children can find recovery. We pray they'll find recovery. There's no guarantee they'll find recovery. We can find our own recovery with family members. And so I'll just close by saying that there's a lot of hope for family members. We need connection. Don't be afraid to talk. My chat, or my email information and contact will be in the info I'll put in the chat with you. But thank you so much. You've had a long day on Zoom here with us. So thanks for hanging in there. If you're still here, thank you. And thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you, Kim. We appreciate all the information and the resources. I mean, I just feel like everything that you were saying, I was like checking off. Yeah, I've encountered that. I've dealt with that. I'm like, so the resources are super helpful and such that we could share with the families that we, that our providers touch and come encounter with. PTA, so such a wealth of great information. Any questions for Kim in her presentation? And you're absolutely right. It's been a long day, and I just want to thank everyone for hanging in there with us, and just staying put. I think that's just speaks to the information and the content that we're getting. So thank you, and seeing everybody saying thank you as well. So
Didn't know if you had any questions.
I see one question. Kim, are you finding that parent participation in parent partnership ebbs and flows? We offer triple P program, and I personally have not had as much luck with that. I'm in a rural area.
I mean, Zoom is consistently heavily attended. And what happened when COVID hit us all and we all moved virtually, we started acquiring a lot of participants from out of state. And so we don't want to disenfranchise those folks by saying like, oh, we're going to go back to that church basement now. So we're still staying on Zoom. That's why we have so many of those. And that has been consistent. I mean, it wanes a little over the summer months, but then it picks right up. We're starting already to see an uptick in our attendance. In person has definitely waned. I'm really sad about that because I just feel there's something different about, I mean, obviously I get to be with all of you because of Zoom. So thank you for that. But there's definitely so much to standing in a parking lot for half an hour talking to somebody after the meeting. There's so much value in that, and it happens. And we are, even our community events, we're getting back in person about 50% of the time now. So yes.
Any other questions? Again, feel free, come off mute if you'd like to ask a question live.
There is no charge for the family recovery course, thanks to all the funding that we get from this one foundation and some counties that support us. It was actually one of our county partners who inspired us to do it. They said, hey, we got some opioid settlement money and we're going to be very creative about how we're going to distribute these funds. And we feel this is helpful to families, and we families need the support as well. That course has been, we wanted to do it for so long. I was very fortunate when my son went to inpatient treatment that his rehabilitation facility had a family education component. They don't all have that. And not all of our kids go to treatment, so we don't always have access to those. I know that Ben has a lot of resources with Michael Barnes and some others who, I am so beholden to those folks who recognize the importance of family recovery and family engagement. If we don't change or reframe our thinking, our kids are coming right back to the triggers and the, where everything was happening. All of our love and best intentions could not prevent this from happening to our darling son, and so we had a lot of learning to do. So yes, we're so grateful we can do this at no charge. I see a question, and I think this is for all of us. How do you each work on accessibility of your trainings and treatment? Our stuff is all on our website. We have a calendar. We have I mentioned a YouTube channel. You'll find Ben Cord on our YouTube channel. He did a program for us called Lessons Learned from Colorado. He's a fan favorite of our group. And so we have a lot of that. You guys want to share anything about access to and obviously Dr. Bonnie has the toolkits.
Yeah, I think if you mean accessibility, like, I mean, our stuff is free. It's completely online. It's downloadable. It's easy. If you're also talking about language or hearing impaired or visually, so we don't have anything visually yet. We've been talking about doing that. We do have, we are translating in terms of language, but we don't have anything for visual or hearing impaired yet. We're still finishing even just creating all the curriculums, and then we are going to be working on that. It's a great question.
I understand now. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't think about that in terms of that kind of accessibility, but you're absolutely right. It's so important. You can access it through Zoom, I'm sure you all know that there's a way to do the captioning and that sort of thing. So I don't know. We have used that a few times. We've had some bilingual presentations, but unfortunately they've been with a translator, and I don't think that's as effective. I would much rather have a Spanish speaking person. We have a lot of a Latino community in our region, and we would love to have a purely Spanish language presentation, because if I'm presenting and somebody's translating, it's too, it's just not as smooth. That's not as conversational. So it's a need. It's an absolute need. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're the same. I mean, my lab doesn't do the student presentations. We teach you teachers and educators and counselors and clinicians to go do that. But agree that we do encourage that ability. I translate when I give webinars. I totally agree with you, Kim. It is better if we can have somebody also working with us who can speak the language. But again, we're just in terms of language doing translations, but beyond that, we don't have the capability. But we'd love to work with somebody to after our curriculums are done.
Okay. Not seeing any other questions. I wanted to take a moment to ask if any of our colleagues or any of our partners from the rescue agency are on, if they'd like to come off mute and just say hello, to even touch on the the campaign that we're working on, which again, I think the first phase of our work with the rescue agency will touch on families and parents and messaging, targeting parents and families. So I see that Sarah Grace is on, and I just wanted to know if you wanted to come off mute. Okay, maybe not. She could have stepped away, but I just want to let folks know that we've been getting a lot of messages or emails in asking, are we coming out with any campaigns? Are we coming out with messaging or anything targeted for social media? And we so totally are. We're working on that and actively working behind the scenes with the rescue agency around some campaigns and messaging. So more to come, and more to come that's going to be messaging directly to families and parents, because we know this is an area where folks are asking for support and help. Let's see, anything else in the chat? Anyone on my team wants to add or say anything? Lee, do you want to do a reminder of the evaluation process?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, again, thanks so much to all of the speakers. This was a true pleasure. I really appreciate you guys for taking this time to be here with New York today. I'm about to put the SurveyMonkey link into the chat again, just to receive the 4 credits for this training or for this workshop series. You must complete this evaluation, because that's where you're going to input your name and your email so that I'm able to generate and then send you the certificate of completion. So I will pop that in now. I will also put it in several times over the next few minutes, just to make sure that nobody misses it. And if for some reason you didn't get a certificate or something went wrong over the next week or so, I'm hoping to have these out by end of next week. So if you don't get anything, please just shoot me an email. I'll put my email there again so that you have all my information. And thanks to everyone who attended today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lee. Stephen, anything?
Nope. It seems like we had a relatively successful tech issue during it. Nobody had any major issues, so that was great. And we just appreciate all the presenters and everyone for joining in today.
Thank you. As I'm looking in and it keeps scrolling up, I'm just trying to make sure I don't miss a question. So I'm not seeing a question, but if somebody wants to come off mute, like I said, I don't want to miss anybody's question. Some things are coming in. Feel free to unmute. But again, yes, to echo everything that everybody's putting in the chat, this was extremely informative, a lot of information. I hope those who attended feel like you've received some information, education, resources, that you feel empowered going, going back into this new school year. And I keep saying going back to the school year, but I just want to make it clear that we're not only talking to school-based prevention providers, we got community-based, we got coalitions represented here. From across the state. I see some of my upstate, Buffalo, Rochester, Finger Lake, all those areas represented. I see New York City DOE is very much present. New York City providers, Long Island. I see across a widespread across the state are here, and I just want to thank everyone for joining and for being present with us. And please continue to stay connected because we do have more that we're doing with this work. We're not letting go of Dr. Bonnie just yet. We are going to be doing some in-person opportunities and learning and really helping to, again, increase everybody's knowledge base and comfort with the material and with cannabis prevention. And with that, any other comments? I see some links going in the chat, more thank yous. I will give folks 10 minutes back in their day. I have no problem with doing that. It's been a long day, so I'm sure you all appreciate that. I can't thank everybody enough for attending. And if there's anything that, questions or anything, please feel free, send us a message through the prevention mailbox, reach out to myself, Stephen, or Lee. And I think that's it. I don't have really anything more that I would want to communicate. Please do, if you haven't gotten to the evaluation, please click on the link. We'll definitely try to send it out again when we send out the slides. We want your feedback. Tell us what we should be doing more of, or what presentations we should be delivering to support you all in your work. Thank you for the speakers. Absolutely. All right. I think that's it. Dr. Bonnie, any last words or anything?
Just thank you all. It was you've been tormented for 4 hours on lots and lots of things. I think are all I think thankfully the three of, well, maybe not thankfully, it's nice when sometimes there's disagreement or controversy, but I think you got similar perspectives on different ways of both prevention, intervention, but similar messages, lots and lots of resources. I hope you use them. Reach out to any of us, and I'll see, I put in the chat, send some, or make sure you have some good weather for this California gal when I come out. But I hope to see you all in person sometime soon. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you. If we don't speak or meet before school begins and school year starts, hope you have a great start back to your school year, and we'll be connecting. All right, take care.